Section 1. The poison at the center of everything. The Springfield nuclear power plant has been on your screen since 1989. You've seen it in the opening credits hundreds of times. That wide establishing shot of the cooling towers against the sky, smoke curling upward, Homer shuffling out the door with a glowing green rod tucked under his arm before dropping it down the back of his shirt on the drive home. It's become wallpaper, background noise, in a show so familiar that most people stopped seeing it decades ago. But the plant is not wallpaper. The plant is the entire story. Let's start slowly because this theory deserves patience. The Springfield nuclear power plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. It sits at the edge of town. It dominates the skyline. It employs a significant portion of Springfield's working population, and it provides the electrical power that keeps every light on in every home in that town. It is, by every economic and infrastructural measure, the beating heart of Springfield. It is also, by every safety and regulatory measure ever depicted in the show, one of the most catastrophically dangerous industrial facilities ever committed to fiction. A surprise safety inspection once uncovered 342 separate violations. Not a handful of paperwork issues. Not some minor procedural oversights that a diligent manager could address in a weekend. 342 distinct problems with the physical operation of a nuclear power plant in a populated town. The estimated cost to bring the facility up to minimum compliance was $56 million. The plant's owner, Charles Montgomery Burns, refused to spend it. He didn't refuse because the money wasn't available. Burns is a billionaire many times over. He refused because spending the money would mean acknowledging the problems existed, and acknowledging the problems existed would invite questions about what those problems had already done to the people of Springfield. Think about that logic for a moment. Burns didn't just allow the violations to continue out of laziness or negligence. He made an active, deliberate choice to let a broken nuclear facility keep operating in a populated area because fixing it would be more damaging to him than leaving it broken. That's not a cartoon villain making a generic evil choice. That's a specific, calculated decision with a specific, calculable cost. Burns ran the numbers. He decided that paying to fix the plant was more expensive than whatever liability might come from not fixing it. And in a town like Springfield, where the regulatory environment appears to consist primarily of Chief Wiggum forgetting what he was investigating, Burns's math was probably correct. Now, let's talk about what those violations actually look like in practice, because the show has been remarkably specific about this. Radioactive waste being dumped directly into bodies of water. Radioactive waste being left on children's playgrounds. Plutonium being used as a paperweight on an office desk, just sitting there, glowing faintly, as though it were a novelty item someone picked up at a gift shop. Cooling towers with visible structural cracks patched using chewing gum. Literal chewing gum, the kind a human being chews for 30 seconds before it loses its flavor. Rats running through the facility that glow in the dark, not metaphorically, actually glowing, their bodies so saturated with radiation that they emit visible light as they scurry through the walls of an active nuclear reactor. And then there are the skeletons. Human skeletons in the basement of the plant. The show mentions this in passing and never returns to it. It doesn't explain who those people were. It doesn't explain how they ended up as skeletons inside a working facility. It doesn't explore whether anyone reported them missing, whether any investigation was conducted, whether Burns has any idea they're there, or simply doesn't care. The bones are shown to the audience, and then the scene moves on, as though discovering human remains inside a nuclear power plant is the kind of thing that happens and then gets filed away. Springfield moves on from it because Springfield always moves on. But we're not going to. The man responsible for ensuring none of this happens, the individual whose job it is to stand between the residents of Springfield and radioactive catastrophe, is Homer Simpson. The show's creator, Matt Groening, has stated that Homer has an IQ of 55. 55. For reference, a score below 70 is generally classified as an intellectual disability. Homer doesn't just fail to prevent accidents at the plant. Homer actively causes them. He sleeps at his workstation. He eats donuts during meltdown warnings. He once threw a donut into the reactor core to see if it would grow larger. In one canonical episode, it's revealed that Homer has had a crayon lodged in his brain since childhood, physically reducing his cognitive function. The crayon is not a metaphor. It is a piece of a wax-writing instrument that traveled into his brain during childhood and remained there for decades, reducing the intellectual capacity of the man responsible for nuclear safety at a facility serving an entire town. Homer is not a negligent employee. Homer is the strategy. We'll come back to that. The first visible mutation in Springfield appears in Season 2. Blinky the three-eyed fish, pulled from a river near the power plant. Within the logic of the show, Blinky's appearance becomes a genuine political scandal. A candidate for governor uses the fish as evidence that Burns is poisoning the local environment. Burns is forced to eat Blinky on live television to demonstrate that the fish is harmless. The town watches, decides that a billionaire eating a mutant fish on camera is somehow reassuring, and moves on. Nobody tests the water after Blinky surfaces. Nobody commissions a study of the riverbed. Nobody asks the obvious question sitting just underneath the surface of everything. If the fish have 3 eyes, what is happening to the people who drink from the same water source? The question is right there. It has been right there since Season 2. And it took the show's fan community, not the show's characters, to actually pursue it. The answer has been visible since Season 8. In the episode The Springfield Files, Homer encounters what he believes is an alien in the woods near town. The sighting causes the kind of town-wide panic you'd expect from Springfield, which is to say an immediate, disproportionate, completely unexamined panic. FBI agents Mulder and Scully are called in. The community braces for a dramatic revelation. The alien is Mr. Burns. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment so intensive, so loaded with chemicals and radiation therapy, that it causes his body to emit what the show describes as a healthy green glow. The treatments keep him alive for exactly 1 more week. Without them, he dies. The margin between treatment and death is 7 days, no more. After each session, Burns wanders out of the treatment facility in a chemically dazed state, stumbling through the surrounding woods, his body radiating visible light, looking to any casual observer like something from another world entirely. The town of Springfield sees a glowing humanoid figure moving through the forest at night. Their first hypothesis is not radiation. Their first hypothesis is not that the person who owns their nuclear power plant is so saturated with radioactive material that he literally glows after medical treatments. Their first hypothesis is extraterrestrial life. That is how completely the residents of Springfield have disconnected the power plant from its consequences. Burns is literally emitting radiation in the woods behind their homes, and they look at him and think alien. Then the Simpsons movie arrives, and the theory stops being a theory and becomes something the show can no longer deny even within its own narrative. Springfield's environmental contamination reaches a point so severe that the Environmental Protection Agency, a real federal agency operating within the show's universe, determines that the only viable solution is physical containment. A massive glass dome is placed over the entire town to prevent Springfield's pollution from spreading to the rest of the country. The United States government looked at Springfield and concluded that the town was so toxic, so fundamentally contaminated, that it needed to be sealed from the outside world. That's the assessment made by the regulatory body responsible for protecting American citizens from environmental hazards. Springfield isn't polluted in the way that many industrial towns are polluted. With some elevated chemical readings in certain areas and a handful of residents with elevated health risks, Springfield is classified as a containment zone. The entire town, every resident, every building, every body of water, every park, every school playground, every backyard where children have been playing for 36 years. And every one of those residents is still inside the dome when it goes up. Now here's where this stops being a thought experiment and starts being something more uncomfortable. The Springfield nuclear power plant doesn't just poison the water and the air. There's a specific theory in the fan community, one that's been building since the earliest seasons, that the plant poisons something else entirely. That Burns specifically and deliberately keeps the population of Springfield in a state of low-grade neurological impairment. Not as a side effect of inadequate safety measures. As a deliberate act of population management, think about what you'd need if you were Burns. You'd need a workforce that wouldn't organize. You'd need a voter base that wouldn't hold politicians accountable for your behavior. You'd need neighbors who would keep electing the same incompetent officials, keep accepting the same conditions, keep looking away from the obvious evidence of what was being done to them. You'd need a population that was, just slightly, too foggy to connect the dots. And you'd need a safety director who was just slightly, too impaired to function as an obstacle. The crayon in Homer's brain is where this theory reaches its strangest and most specific point. We know the crayon exists. We know it reduces Homer's cognitive function. We know Homer has been employed at the plant for decades, and Burns has known about Homer's limitations the entire time. The question the show never answers is how the crayon got there. Homer himself doesn't know. His memory of the childhood incident is hazy. His parents don't explain it. The origin of the crayon is left completely open. Some fans have proposed that the crayon isn't accidental at all, that it was placed there deliberately, perhaps during an early medical examination at the plant's company doctor, as a way of ensuring Homer would never be capable of whistleblowing. It sounds paranoid. Except that Burns has been shown repeatedly to maintain detailed surveillance files on every employee. He has the resources to arrange medical interventions. He has both the motive and the capability to ensure that his safety director is never a genuine threat to his operation. And he chose Homer Simpson for the job. Of all the people in Springfield, of all the candidates who could have been given the role of nuclear safety inspector at a facility with 342 violations, Burns chose the man with a crayon in his brain and an IQ of 55. He didn't promote Homer by accident. He chose Homer. That choice has been the central joke of the show since 1989. But it stopped being a joke a long time ago, and somewhere in the writing staff of The Simpsons, someone knew it. The Homer as strategy theory has one more piece of evidence that almost nobody talks about. In the episode Homer's Enemy, Frank Grimes arrives at the plant as a new employee. Grimes is competent, educated, and capable. He looks at Homer's workstation and is genuinely horrified. He looks at the safety protocols and cannot believe what he's seeing. He spends the entire episode in a state of increasing disbelief at the fact that Homer's life works at all, that Homer functions, that Homer has a house and a family and a career when, by any logical measure, Homer should have been removed from his position and possibly prosecuted years ago. Frank Grimes dies at the end of the episode. He is driven to something like madness by the sheer irrationality of Homer's continued existence in this role, reaches for a power line in a frantic impersonation of Homer's recklessness, and is electrocuted. Springfield attends his funeral and spends the eulogy laughing at Homer's snoring from the front pew. The fandom has long read Frank Grimes as the stand-in for the audience. The person who sees Springfield clearly, who asks the real questions, who cannot reconcile what he observes with any reasonable framework. And the show's answer to Frank Grimes' death: he is removed. Not by Burns, not by the plant, not by any visible conspiracy. He simply cannot survive inside Springfield's logic while being conscious of that logic. The one person who looked directly at what was happening at the Springfield nuclear power plant and said out loud that it made no sense is gone by the episode's end. Springfield does not tolerate people who see it clearly. The water comes last in this theory, and it's the most damning piece. Springfield has a lake, a river, a reservoir, and a municipal water supply. All of them are downstream from the plant. All of them have been shown at various points to contain unusual substances, abnormal organisms, or visible contamination. The fish mutate. The water sometimes glows. The local ecosystem produces creatures that shouldn't exist under normal conditions. And the people of Springfield drink this water, swim in this lake, eat from this river, decade after decade, season after season, episode after episode. The question isn't whether the plant has damaged them. The question is how much, and whether anyone at the top of this town ever intended to stop it. There is no answer in the show. There has never been an answer. The Springfield nuclear power plant has been slowly harming this town since before the cameras first turned on, and the cameras have been rolling for 36 years, and the cooling towers are still standing, and Homer Simpson is still employed, and Charles Montgomery Burns is still alive. And somewhere in the basement, the skeletons are still there. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now telling us where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. There are people from every corner of the planet in these comment sections, and it's genuinely something worth seeing. And if you're finding this worth your time, hit subscribe. There are 11 more sections ahead, and they only get stranger from here. Section 2. Has Springfield been a dream since 1993? On the 1st of April 1993, The Simpsons aired an episode called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. It was the 18th episode of Season 4. The premise was a fairly standard Simpsons premise for that era. Bart plays a prank on Homer that escalates beyond its intended scope, and Homer ends up in the hospital. While Homer is lying in his hospital bed, he attempts to reach a vending machine across the room. The machine tips over, it crushes him, and Homer Simpson enters a coma. This is treated within the episode as a plot mechanism. Homer is in a coma for 7 weeks. He eventually wakes up. The family is reunited. Bart confesses the prank was his fault. Homer springs up and immediately begins strangling his son, and everyone laughs. The show continues. The credits roll. But in the final moments of the episode, something is mentioned that the audience is clearly expected to find funny and then forget about. During the coma, Homer lost 5% of his brain function. Permanently. He laughs when he's told this, then admits he doesn't understand why he's laughing. The family finds this charming. The episode ends. What the fan community found years later is that this isn't funny at all. It's a door. And what's on the other side of it reframes everything that came before it and everything that has aired since. The Homer coma theory holds that Homer Simpson did not fully recover from the events of that April 1993 episode. It holds that what looks like a recovery, Homer waking up and strangling Bart and everything going back to normal, is itself part of the dream. Homer's brain, severely compromised by the combination of the explosion and the vending machine impact and 7 weeks of diminished consciousness, cannot maintain a coherent connection to external reality. It has retreated into an internal narrative, and every episode that has aired since that date is a product of that narrative. A dream being generated by the damaged mind of a man who is still, in some fundamental sense, lying in that hospital bed. The evidence the fan community has assembled for this theory is substantial. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a different kind of show. Its storylines were grounded in recognizable human problems. Homer tries to quit drinking. Marge considers whether she made the right choices. Bart faces the possibility of being held back a year at school. Lisa develops a crush on a substitute teacher who has to leave. These are the concerns of real families. They're told with satire and exaggeration, yes, but the emotional core of the early seasons is everyday domestic life. After the coma episode, the show's reality breaks open. Homer goes to space. Homer meets God, multiple times. Homer joins a secret society. Homer discovers that his mother, who he was told had died, has actually been living as a fugitive radical. Homer befriends an extraordinary number of celebrities. Homer holds hundreds of different jobs across the season run. Homer travels to dozens of countries, meets presidents, survives catastrophes that would kill any normal person many times over. The escalation is so dramatic that even fans who have never heard of the coma theory have noticed it. The discussion of when The Simpsons got weird, when it shifted from the grounded domestic comedy of the early seasons to the surrealist, celebrity-laden chaos of the later ones, has been going on for 20 years. The coma theory's answer to that discussion is precise. The show didn't get weird, the dream got worse. Here's the part that lodges in your memory and doesn't leave. 6 months before the coma episode, in the season 4 premiere, Homer has a conversation with God. An actual face-to-face conversation, the way you'd talk to someone you met on the street. And during that conversation, God tells Homer that he will eventually learn the meaning of life, but that the time isn't yet. God tells Homer his time is coming. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The fan community has been sitting with that timeline since at least 2012. God told Homer in the season 4 premiere that his conscious life had a horizon, and 6 months later, Homer hit it. What makes the coma theory more than a clever reframing of production choices is the way it explains things the show has never adequately explained through any other framework. The aging problem is the most obvious example. Nobody in The Simpsons ages. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1 year old since before most of the current audience was born. Homer and Marge have been roughly the same age since 1989. The floating timeline, which we'll discuss in more detail in a later section, is usually explained as a narrative convention, a decision the writers made to keep the characters indefinitely available for the stories they want to tell. The coma theory has a different explanation. Nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of a man who went unconscious in April 1993. The children in Homer's dream are the children as Homer last saw them before the darkness came. They don't age because Homer cannot imagine them aging. He wasn't there to see it happen. His memory of them is fixed at the last moment he experienced them as real, breathing, physically present people, and that memory is what his dreaming brain has been working from ever since. This is not a small thing. It means that Bart Simpson's 10-year-oldness isn't a production convenience. It's a portrait of grief. It's the image a father preserves of his son when he cannot be present to watch his son grow. The comedy of Bart being perpetually 10, the endless pranks and the skateboard and the same yellow shirt, all of it is Homer holding onto a version of his boy that the real world has long since moved past. The celebrity appearances, which become increasingly frequent and sometimes overwhelming in the show's later seasons, have a specific explanation under the coma theory. Homer's body is lying in a hospital room. There is, presumably, a television in that room. There are nurses and doctors and maybe family members who come and go. There are sounds from the hallway and from the waiting room and from the world outside the window. Homer's brain is receiving ambient sensory input, fragments of the external world bleeding through the unconsciousness, names and voices and cultural references. And his dreaming brain, trying to fill out the texture of the world it's constructing, incorporates those fragments as characters in the dream. That's why Springfield keeps filling with celebrities. Not because celebrities love Springfield, because Homer's sleeping mind keeps hearing them on the television at the foot of his bed and weaving them into the story. The most painful version of this theory concerns Marge. Homer and Marge's relationship is the emotional engine of the show. Every season, no matter how outlandish the plots get, no matter how far the show travels from the domestic core of the early episodes, the marriage between Homer and Marge is presented as the thing that holds everything together. Their love is the through line. It is what makes the show feel worth something even when the plots have fully left the ground. Under the coma theory, Homer's love for Marge is the entire reason the dream exists. Not the show, the dream. Homer's unconscious mind is generating an entire world, sustaining that world across thousands of episodes spanning decades, because it needs Marge to be in it. It needs her to be there, to still be in love with him, to be in the kitchen and in the car and sitting beside him on the couch. The dream will never let the marriage permanently fail, because the marriage ending would be the dream ending, and the dream ending would mean Homer has to confront what's actually happening in that hospital room. The show has imagined the failure of the marriage many times. Separations, affairs, threatened if not enacted, periods where the gap between Homer and Marge becomes almost unsurvivable. And every time, the marriage rights itself. The dream will not let it fail. Not because the writers believe marriages never fail, because Homer will not let himself dream of losing her. There are specific episodes that support this reading in ways that feel almost too deliberate to be coincidental. There is a late-season episode where Homer is given a terminal diagnosis and must come to terms with his own death. The episode has a quality that's different from the show's usual treatment of mortality. Homer moves through it with something close to genuine fear, the kind that doesn't resolve easily, the kind that isn't fully washed away by the comedy. The fan community has noted that this episode feels like a dreaming brain coming close to consciousness, like the part of Homer's mind that knows what's actually happening starting to surface in the dream. He doesn't die in that episode. The diagnosis is revised. The crisis passes, the dream continues. But there's a specific moment in the episode, brief and easy to miss, where Homer stands in his backyard, looking at the house and everything he's built inside this dream, and his face holds something that looks less like relief and more like the expression of a man who knows, on some level, that none of this will last. The fan community eventually developed a variant of the coma theory that's arguably even more affecting than the original. In this variant, Homer isn't alone in the dream. He knows, somewhere below the surface level of the narrative, that he's dreaming. The resets, the impossibility, the way consequences never fully accumulate, all of it is Homer's dreaming mind maintaining the conditions it needs to keep the story going. The comedy is the dream protecting itself. The slapstick, the absurdity, the way Homer can be hit by a car and walk away, it's the dreaming brain refusing to let anything end, refusing to let any single consequence become the one that breaks the story. Because if the story breaks, Homer has to wake up. And if Homer wakes up in 1993, he looks at a world that has moved on without him. He doesn't know how much time has passed. He doesn't know if his children are still children. He doesn't know if Marge waited. He doesn't know if anyone is still sitting in the chairs beside his bed, or if those chairs have been empty for a long time, or if the room itself is the same room. The hospital discharged him, and he's somewhere else now. Somewhere different. Somewhere where the family is older, and the house has changed, and the yellow skin and 4 fingers, and the nuclear plant on the horizon are just memories from a very long dream he once had. The show will never confirm the coma theory. The writers have addressed it and pushed back on it and occasionally winked at it through meta-references in the text of the show itself. But they will not confirm it, because confirming it would end things in a way they're not willing to end them. And that refusal to end things is itself, under the coma theory, the truest thing about the show. Homer refuses to wake up. The dream refuses to end. And every Sunday night, the couch gag plays, and the family takes their places, and Springfield assembles itself from memory and longing, and the man in the hospital bed holds on a little longer. Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns? On the 21st of May 1995, The Simpsons aired the most famous cliffhanger in its history. Mr. Burns had gone further than he'd ever gone before. He had stolen an oil well from beneath Springfield Elementary, eliminating the school's financial foundation. He had destroyed Moe's Tavern through a cascade of economic damage. He had created a sinkhole that took out the Springfield retirement castle. He had arranged for Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, to be injured. And for his final act, he had constructed a device capable of blocking the sun over Springfield, positioning it to create a permanent artificial night that would force every resident of the town to buy their electricity exclusively from his plant. He had, in other words, stolen the sky. When Smithers protested, Burns fired him on the spot. By the end of Part 1, every significant character in Springfield had a documented motive to want Burns dead. The show had constructed this deliberately, spending the entire episode establishing grievances, showing weapons being carried, building to a confrontation at a town meeting where the collective rage of the entire community finally found its focus. And then Burns collapsed. A gunshot wound. He was found at the sundial, his hands positioned on 2 specific letters. The ambulance came. The credits rolled. And America had the entire summer to figure out who pulled the trigger. The official answer, delivered in September 1995, is Maggie Simpson. Maggie is identified as the shooter through a combination of physical evidence and Burns' own testimony from his hospital bed. According to Burns, he encountered Maggie near his car after the town meeting. He attempted to take her lollipop. His gun fell from its holster during the struggle. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot. The show committed to this answer. The writers maintained it. The DVD commentary treats it as settled. And yet, for 30 years, the fan community has never fully accepted it. Let's start with the physical problems. Burns' gun was not in his holster when he arrived at the town meeting. This is established visually in the episode. The holster is empty. The gun was already missing from his person before the shooting occurred. This is consistent with the show's eventual resolution that Maggie found the gun after it fell during their struggle near his car. But it also means that somewhere between Burns' office and the town meeting, someone had the opportunity to take the gun from his holster without him noticing. Burns is frail. Burns is easily distracted. Burns often fails to register what is happening around him unless it directly concerns his own interests. Someone could have taken the gun. Someone could have used it. And the story about Maggie and the lollipop could be a constructed alibi that Burns, either because he genuinely doesn't remember clearly or because he has his own reasons for protecting the real shooter, put forward from his hospital bed. The sundial is the second problem. The show presents Burns' hands falling on the letters W and S, which from his perspective spell MS, the initials of Maggie Simpson, as a key clue. But Burns himself confirms that he did not deliberately position his hands to spell his attacker's initials. He fell. It was coincidental. The central piece of evidence pointing to Maggie is, by the victim's own account, meaningless. The show acknowledges this through Burns' dialogue and then expects the audience to accept the resolution anyway. The writers essentially tell you that their big clue is not actually a clue and then proceed as though it is. The third problem is Burns' behavior when his attacker approached. His last words before the shooting, the words he manages to say when he sees the person who is about to shoot him, are reportedly some version of recognizing them. A greeting of recognition, not alarm. Something in the range of, "Oh, it's you." He sees the shooter and his response is identification, not fear. Does Burns know Maggie Simpson? Has he ever had a meaningful interaction with her that would make her someone he'd recognize and greet in this way? The show does not establish any prior relationship between Burns and Maggie before this event. Burns can barely remember Homer's name, and Homer works for him daily. The idea that Burns would see this specific infant approaching him in a parking lot and respond with the relaxed recognition of seeing someone familiar requires something the show never provides, a relationship between them that justifies that response. The Smithers question has been the most discussed alternative in the fan community for 30 years, and it remains the most compelling. Smithers had been fired that day. He had devoted his life, his entire professional and personal identity, to a man who dismissed him without sentiment. He had access, through years of managing Burns's schedule, to every detail of Burns's movements. He knew about the gun. He knew the route Burns would take from the town meeting. He had the deepest emotional wound of anyone in Springfield that night. The show gave Smithers a convenient alibi, but the alibi is self-provided and appears in a form that the show presents comically rather than definitively. The camera that shows Smithers elsewhere during the shooting is the same show that has built this mystery and is about to resolve it, and that show has already demonstrated it's willing to misdirect. There is also the matter of what happened after Burns recovered and identified his shooter. If Burns genuinely believed Maggie shot him, the aftermath makes some sense. You don't prosecute an infant. You chalk it up to a freak accident and you move on. But if Burns knew the truth, if he knew Smithers shot him and constructed the Maggie story to protect Smithers for reasons of his own, then his continued employment of Smithers in the exact same role takes on a completely different character. That's not forgiveness. That's leverage. Burns would have something over Smithers forever, a secret that Smithers could never expose without destroying himself. The dynamic between Burns and Smithers in every episode after the shooting would, in this reading, be the dynamic between a man who holds a secret and the man he holds it over. Smithers' unwavering devotion, which the show usually frames as loyalty, becomes something more compelled, not freely given, maintained under the weight of what Burns knows and could say. The fan community has also developed a theory that places Homer as the actual shooter, supported by a moment in a much later season where Homer claims, apparently casually and without consequence, that he was the one who shot Burns. The show treats this as a throwaway moment. Nobody investigates it. Nobody reopens the case. Homer's apparent confession disappears into the noise of the episode and is never mentioned again. If Homer shot Burns, then the DNA evidence that pointed to the Simpson family in the original investigation pointed not at the wrong Simpson, but at the right one. The investigation came close to the truth and was redirected at the last moment by Burns's identification of Maggie from his hospital bed, an identification from a man who had just emerged from a gunshot coma and has a documented history of failing to correctly identify the people around him. The show gave you an answer in 1995. The answer has a body of evidence supporting it and a body of evidence complicating it. The fan community has spent 30 years with both, and the honest conclusion is that the most famous mystery in Simpsons history was closed without being solved, and the show knew it, and that knowledge is what gives the ending its strange, unsatisfying quality that people have been trying to name for 3 decades. It feels unfinished because it is unfinished. The case was closed, not cracked. And in Springfield, as we're about to spend the rest of this video discovering, those are 2 completely different things. Section 4. The unsolvable geography of Springfield. Springfield is somewhere in America. That is the most specific thing the show will tell you about its location, and it took 36 years for the show's creator to even confirm that much. Matt Groening has said that Springfield was named after Springfield, Oregon, the town near Portland where he grew up. He has said this is the definitive answer. He has said it in print interviews. He has said the mystery is solved. The writers of the show did not update their behavior to match Groening's declaration. Episodes continued to be produced that place Springfield in geographic contexts completely inconsistent with Oregon. The mountains and coastlines and deserts and farmlands that appear in different episodes are not the mountains and coastlines and deserts and farmlands of the Pacific Northwest. The weather is wrong. The neighboring states are wrong. The highway systems are wrong. The show's creator said Oregon, and the show kept doing whatever it wanted. This is not an accident. The geographic inconsistency of Springfield is too thorough, too systematic, too consistent across too many episodes over too many decades to be explained by writer error or lazy research. The writers know where Oregon is. They know what Oregon looks like. They are choosing, season after season, to place Springfield in a geography that cannot be pinned to any single location. The fan community has been mapping this for years, and the map they've produced is extraordinary. Springfield has been established, at various times, as being adjacent to the following geographic features: mountains of the Rocky Mountain variety, coastal ocean access, desert terrain consistent with the Southwest, farmland consistent with the Midwest, dense, temperate rainforest, a significant river system, a canyon structure, a lake large enough to support commercial fishing, and a harbor capable of receiving large cargo vessels. There is no point in the United States where all of these features exist in proximity to one another, not even close to proximity. The closest you could get would put you in a region where maybe 3 or 4 of these features might be accessible within a long day's drive, but you cannot have mountains and ocean and desert and farmland and canyon all within the range that Springfield's characters routinely treat as local. They go to these places for day trips. They drive to the coast on a whim. The mountain range appears on the horizon from downtown. The geography is physically impossible by any conventional reading, which means either the writers are extraordinarily sloppy about geography across 36 years of production, which strains credibility given that these are otherwise meticulous storytellers, or the geography of Springfield is designed to be impossible. It's designed to be everywhere at once, which means it belongs to no particular place, which means it exists everywhere simultaneously in the mind of the audience, and nowhere specifically on any real American map. The fan community's most interesting engagement with Springfield's geography isn't about trying to pin it down. It's about what the impossibility serves. Consider what you cannot do with a town that has no fixed location. You cannot establish which state's laws apply to it. You cannot determine which EPA regional office has jurisdiction over its nuclear facility. You cannot identify which state attorney general would have standing to investigate its mayor's corruption. You cannot establish which federal circuit court district covers its crimes. Springfield's geographic ambiguity is, in practice, a comprehensive legal shield. The town floats between jurisdictions the way money floats between tax structures, occupying a space that is technically everywhere and therefore practically subject to nothing. This explains a great deal about why the plant has never faced serious federal intervention despite its 342 violations and its documented habit of creating three-eyed fish. Federal agencies operate in defined geographic territories. If Springfield doesn't stay in one place long enough to be firmly within any of those territories, the agencies have procedural difficulty pursuing enforcement actions. You can't serve a subpoena to a building that's technically in a different state every week. The show has played with this directly on at least one occasion. In an episode where Springfield's location becomes briefly relevant to a plot involving interstate commerce or federal law, the question of which state Springfield is in becomes a genuine procedural obstacle. Characters begin citing conflicting evidence. Officials become confused. The ambiguity that was supposed to be a background gag suddenly has practical legal consequences. And then the episode moves on, and Springfield is wherever it needs to be for the next story. The founding mythology of Springfield adds another layer to the geographic mystery. Jebediah Springfield, the town's founder, is depicted as a heroic pioneer who led settlers to this land and built a community through courage and determination. He has a statue. He has a museum. He has an annual festival. Generations of Springfield children have grown up revering his memory. He was, according to evidence uncovered by Lisa Simpson in one of the show's most quietly devastating episodes, actually a murderous pirate named Hans Sprungfeld, who despised the town he founded and who had a history of violence that his later hagiographers completely suppressed. The heroic Jebediah Springfield is a fabrication built over the real Hans Sprungfeld, and the fabrication has been so complete and so long maintained that the historical record inside Springfield treats it as fact. Lisa finds proof. Lisa prepares to reveal the truth publicly, and then she looks at the faces of the people she'd be telling. People who love the myth, who need the myth, who have organized their community identity around the myth, and she backs down. She protects the lie because the truth would cost more than she's willing to charge. This is the origin story of Springfield's relationship to its own history. The town was founded by someone who wasn't who they said they were, in a place they can't quite identify, for reasons that have been sanitized beyond recognition. The geographic impossibility is consistent with a founding that never had honest coordinates. A town built on a fabricated identity would have a fabricated location. The instability runs from the first day all the way to the present. There's one more element of the geography question that almost never comes up in the fan community's analysis, possibly because it's so close to the surface that it's easy to overlook. The name Springfield is the most common town name in America. There are Springfields in at least 30 states. When Groening chose this name, he chose the most geographically universal name available. A Springfield in Oregon is just as named Springfield as a Springfield in Massachusetts or Missouri or Illinois. Every American who has a Springfield somewhere in their state, and a remarkable number of Americans do, can look at this show and believe, in some corner of their mind, that it might be set in their Springfield, that this is their town, that the nuclear plant on the edge of town and the yellow-skinned family on Evergreen Terrace and the incompetent mayor and the corrupt billionaire might all be just down the road from where they grew up. That universality is the point. Springfield is not located because Springfield is everywhere, and a problem that is everywhere is a problem that belongs to everyone. And a problem that belongs to everyone tends, in practice, to be addressed by no one. Springfield's geographic ambiguity is its most honest feature. It's a town that refuses to be pinned down because the things happening inside it are not particular to any specific American location. They're happening everywhere. The nuclear plant and the bought officials and the environmental damage and the population, too distracted to fully engage with the reality of their situation. That's not Springfield. That's anywhere. That's everywhere. That's the point the show has been making since episode 1. It just made the point by refusing to tell you which state you were looking at and letting you fill in the blank yourself. Let's go deeper on the radiation theory, because there's a piece of it that gets overlooked when people discuss the surface-level evidence. It's not just about physical mutations. The radiation theory has a psychological dimension that's arguably more disturbing than three-eyed fish. Consider what we know about the long-term neurological effects of chronic low-level radiation exposure in real-world populations. The research, which is ongoing and sometimes contested, suggests that extended exposure to low doses of radiation can produce cognitive effects that don't manifest as obvious impairment. They manifest as subtle changes in executive function, in working memory, in the capacity for abstract reasoning. The person experiencing them often can't detect them. They feel normal. They function normally by most external measures. But their ability to construct complex causal chains, to hold multiple competing possibilities in mind simultaneously, to plan over longer time horizons, is quietly, measurably reduced. This is the most chilling version of the radiation theory. Not that Springfield's residents are visibly impaired. They're not. They function. They talk. They work. They fall in love. They argue. They make jokes. They run for office and write music and start businesses. They live full lives. But there is a specific cognitive capacity that has been gently, carefully reduced in the population. The capacity to look at a series of events, trace their origin, and ask who benefits. Homer can love his family. He can hold down a job, technically. He can navigate the social landscape of Springfield. He just cannot, with any consistency, connect the dots between the plant and his water, and his fish, and his children's 4 fingers, and his own IQ, and the billionaire who owns it all. None of them can. Springfield has hundreds of residents, and across 36 years of the show, the number of Springfield citizens who have ever meaningfully connected the plant to the town's conditions can be counted on one 4-fingered hand. Lisa gets close, but Lisa is always too young, too easily dismissed, too easily worn down by the weight of a community that doesn't want to hear what she's saying. Frank Grimes got close, and we know what happened to him. The other residents never get close at all. They look at a world that is obviously, demonstrably, visibly wrong in dozens of specific ways, and the best they can manage is a vague, occasional discomfort before the fog comes back and everything seems fine again. That's the radiation theory at its most specific. Burns isn't keeping Springfield impaired enough that they can't function. He's keeping them impaired enough that they can't threaten him. And the line between those two things is narrower than it sounds. And the plant has been walking it for decades, and the people of Springfield have been walking it with the plant without ever realizing they were walking it at all. Now consider the economic dimension of this. The Springfield nuclear power plant is the primary employer in the town. It's not just Homer who depends on the plant for his income. The plant employs workers across a range of skill levels. Those workers spend their paychecks in the local economy, supporting local businesses, which employ local workers, who themselves depend on the spending power of the plant's employees. Burns's plant is not just the power source for Springfield. It's the economic engine that keeps the entire local economy running. This creates a dependency structure that has nothing to do with radiation and everything to do with rational self-interest. Even a Springfield resident who has somehow managed to perceive, clearly and correctly, that the plant is damaging their community faces an enormous practical obstacle. If you shut down the plant, or if you force Burns to spend the money required to fix it, you don't just clean up the water, you potentially collapse the local economy. You eliminate jobs. You reduce the spending power that supports every business in town. You create the conditions for a recession that will harm the very people you were trying to protect. This is the genius of the company-town structure. By becoming the economic foundation of the place, the plant makes itself untouchable through rational calculation, even for people who are not cognitively impaired by its output. You don't need the radiation to keep Springfield compliant. You just need the paycheck. The radiation is, in this reading, a belt and suspenders approach. Burns covers his bases. He makes the town dependent economically. He makes it compliant neurologically. He makes it legally unlocatable. He makes it historically falsified. He makes it politically captured. He makes it judicially compliant. And then he puts Homer in the safety director's chair and watches the whole system run. The plant's influence extends beyond the workers who draw paychecks from it. Springfield's tax base depends on the plant's revenues and the wages it generates. The town's public institutions, its schools, its parks, its roads, are funded in significant part by the economic activity the plant sustains. If you take away the plant, you don't just lose jobs. You lose the funding for the fire department. You lose the funding for the already struggling Springfield Elementary. You lose the funding for the water treatment facility that is, admittedly, not doing a great job of treating the water, but is at least providing the appearance of institutional function. Springfield cannot remove the plant because Springfield is built around the plant. The plant is not a feature of Springfield. The plant is the infrastructure on which Springfield runs, which means that the thing that is poisoning Springfield is also the thing that is keeping Springfield alive. And that's not an accident. That's the most elegant trap in the history of corporate power in a fictional universe. Burns designed a town that needs him. The town needs him to survive. He needs the town to sustain his operation. The loop is closed. The dependency is mutual. And the people inside the loop don't just lack the cognitive clarity to see it. They lack the economic ability to escape it even if they could see it. Homer's crayon becomes, in this light, almost a redundancy. Almost. Burns covers so many bases that the crayon might not be strictly necessary. But Burns has always been a belt and suspenders operator. He doesn't rely on a single point of control when multiple redundant controls are available. The radiation does the general work on the population. The economic dependency does the structural work. The political capture does the institutional work. And the crayon does the specific, targeted work of ensuring that the one man whose job specifically positions him to observe and report violations remains constitutionally incapable of doing so. 342 violations. 36 years. Same safety director. Same cooling towers. Same glowing fish. Burns's system is running exactly as designed. The coma theory has a specific emotional logic that makes it more than just a reframing of the show's production history. Let's spend some time with it, because the emotional architecture of the theory is what makes it so hard to let go of once you've encountered it. Homer Simpson, in the original 7 seasons of the show, before the coma is theorized to have occurred, is drawn as a man who is deeply aware of his own limitations and deeply afraid of losing what he has. He knows he's not smart. He knows he's not ambitious. He knows that his family is more than he deserves by any reasonable measure. And this knowledge produces in him a specific, consistent anxiety, the fear that the people he loves will eventually realize they could do better, that Marge will leave, that the children will grow up and grow away. that the warm, chaotic, imperfect life he has built on Evergreen Terrace will reveal itself as too fragile to sustain. This is the emotional core of the early seasons. Homer's love is real, and his terror of losing it is real, and the comedy of the show emerges from the tension between his enormous capacity for love and his enormous incapacity to handle life intelligently. He keeps nearly losing everything through stupidity and selfishness and inattention, and then something saves him at the last moment. Usually Marge, usually the family, usually the love that turns out to be more durable than his disasters. Now the coma. Homer's brain, deprived of external input, denied the sensory experience of actually being with his family, generates a dream that resolves his central anxiety completely. In the dream, Marge never leaves. In the dream, the children never grow up and move away. In the dream, the family is always there, always intact, always the same. The specific fears that drive Homer in the early seasons are resolved permanently by the coma. Not through growth or wisdom or any positive change in Homer, just through the permanent cessation of the conditions that could produce loss. The dream gives Homer everything he was afraid to lose by making loss impossible. By removing the mechanism that would normally produce change, by stopping time, by holding the family in amber at the last moment before the coma, the dream delivers exactly what Homer's anxiety has always wanted. Permanence, safety, the guarantee that the people he loves will always be there. This is why the coma theory is, for many fans, not just a reframing of the show's production history, but an actually moving interpretation of it. It reads the entire post, 1993 run of The Simpsons as an act of love. A broken, unconscious, possibly dying man holding onto his family with every neuron still firing, generating a world where the family persists, where they're always together, where everything is fine, where the beer is cold and the donuts are glazed, and the kids are fighting in the back seat, and Marge is sighing gently at something Homer said, and life is exactly as full and loud and imperfect as it has always been. The comedy of the show, under this reading, is not at Homer's expense. It's in Homer's honor. The man is in a coma, and even from inside a coma, even with 5% of his brain function permanently gone, he dreams a world where his family keeps happening to him, where Bart keeps pranking him and Lisa keeps lecturing him, and Marge keeps putting her hand on his arm when he goes too far, where the texture of daily family life, which is mostly annoying and occasionally transcendent, keeps filling the space around him. He could dream anything. He could dream success and recognition and respect. He could dream a version of himself that is smart and capable and admired. He could dream the life he might have had if the crayon hadn't been there, if the radiation hadn't been there, if Burns hadn't taken his mother and damaged his family and hired him specifically because of his limitations. He doesn't. He dreams his family, exactly as they are. He dreams the chaos and the love and the terrible dad jokes, and the unexpectedly moving moments by the fire. He dreams the ordinary life that was taken from him when the vending machine fell, and he dreams it in enough detail that 36 years later it is still running, still generating episodes, still giving him a Thursday night in the house on Evergreen Terrace where everyone is home for dinner. There's a version of the coma theory that's a ghost story. A man who died in 1993 and doesn't know it yet, generating increasingly desperate fiction to avoid the knowledge that he's gone. But the more interesting version is not a ghost story. It's a love story. A man who went to sleep and chose, on every level of his diminished consciousness, to keep dreaming about the people he loves more than anything else in his life. And the dream runs. And the episodes air. And we watch, all of us, from outside the dream, knowing we can see something that Homer can't. We're watching a man's love for his family, exteriorized and projected across a television screen, given form by writers and animators and voice actors who may or may not have known they were telling this particular story. The show doesn't know it's a love letter. The dreamer doesn't know he's dreaming. But we know, watching from outside, and the knowing makes every episode something other than what it appears to be on the surface. It makes the couch gag into a prayer. It makes the opening credits into a man calling roll. Marge is here, Bart is here, Lisa is here, Maggie is here, Homer is still in the game. The shooting of Mr. Burns has more forensic problems than the ones we discussed initially. Let's look at them one by one, because each one is a thread that, if you pull it, the official resolution starts to unravel in a very specific direction. The first problem is time of death, or in this case, time of shooting. The episode establishes that the town meeting at which Burns made his sun-blocking announcement ended at a specific time. Burns was found at the sundial sometime after that. The window in which the shooting occurred is known, approximately, and within that window, the show establishes the movements and locations of most of the suspects. But the show does not establish a precise timeline. It doesn't give us a sequence of events tight enough to definitively eliminate any suspect based on time alone. The comedic investigation by Chief Wiggum, which is more interested in producing jokes than evidence, glosses over the timing questions that a real investigation would spend considerable effort on. We don't know, from the episode's internal evidence, exactly how much time passed between the end of the meeting and the discovery of Burns at the sundial. We don't know the precise time at which the shooting occurred, and without that, the alibi evidence that the show uses to eliminate suspects is much weaker than it appears. Smithers' alibi, specifically, depends on establishing that Smithers was somewhere other than the sundial area during the relevant window. The show provides a flashback that appears to establish this. But the flashback is comedic in tone, and it doesn't establish precise timing. It shows Smithers doing something else, but not when relative to the shooting. In a real investigation, the defense counsel would shred this alibi in cross-examination. On The Simpsons, it's treated as dispositive. The second forensic problem is the gun itself. The gun used to shoot Burns was Burns's own gun, taken from his person. This means the shooter had close physical proximity to Burns at some point before the shooting, close enough to remove a gun from an interior holster or pocket. Most of the suspects at the town meeting were maintaining a confrontational distance from Burns, not a physical proximity distance. The suspects who were in close physical proximity to Burns that evening are a much smaller subset than the full suspect list. Who was close enough to Burns to take his gun? Smithers, certainly, who was fired by Burns in the episode and who had extensive experience managing Burns's personal effects. Homer, possibly, given that Homer had a specific grievance and was at the meeting. Members of Burns's personal security detail, if he had one. And Maggie, according to the official story, in the parking lot. The third forensic problem is the wound itself. Burns was shot in the chest. The angle and trajectory of the wound, if properly analyzed, would tell investigators something about the height of the shooter relative to Burns. Burns is extraordinarily short and frail. A wound fired by an infant at ground level would have a different trajectory than a wound fired by an adult at standing height. The show doesn't address this. Chief Wiggum's investigation doesn't include a ballistics analysis. The trajectory evidence that would either support or undermine Maggie's guilt is simply never examined. If the wound trajectory is inconsistent with an infant shooter, then the official story is physically impossible regardless of what Burns says from his hospital bed. The fan community has proposed that this specific piece of missing evidence is the key to the whole mystery. The show avoided the ballistics analysis because the ballistics analysis would have made the Maggie explanation impossible. The writers needed the mystery to resolve, and they needed it to resolve in a way that was both surprising and legally consequence-free, which meant it had to be someone who couldn't be prosecuted. An infant fits that criterion perfectly. But the physical evidence doesn't necessarily fit, and the show chose not to show us the physical evidence rather than risk the audience noticing the gap. This is the kind of choice that gets made in television mysteries all the time. You give the audience enough to accept the resolution emotionally, without giving them enough to evaluate it forensically. The Who Shot Mr. Burns resolution works emotionally. It's unexpected, it's funny, it lets the show continue without putting a major character in prison, but it doesn't work forensically. And the show knows it doesn't work forensically, which is why it keeps winking at the audience through meta-references, the Smithers alternate ending, Homer's later confession, the final shot of Maggie in the empty room. The show is telling you it knows the answer is questionable, it just isn't going to give you a better one. The unsolved mystery is not a failure. It's the point. A show about a town where the truth is always just slightly out of reach, where the official answer is always just slightly wrong, where the investigation is always just slightly too incompetent to produce justice, gave us a mystery where the official answer is just slightly wrong and the investigation was just slightly too incompetent to produce justice. The Who Shot Mr. Burns mystery is the most Springfield thing The Simpsons has ever done, and it solved itself perfectly by not solving itself at all. The geography mystery has one more layer that almost never comes up in the fan community's analysis, and it involves a very specific episode that the show's creators have never adequately explained. In Season 8, there is an episode in which Springfield's exact coordinates are briefly, accidentally revealed through a combination of on-screen text and navigational context that the writers appear not to have intended as a definitive answer. The fan community jumped on this immediately. For a brief moment, Springfield seemed to have a location. People pulled out maps, they identified the coordinates. They found a real-world location that, with appropriate suspension of disbelief, could plausibly be Springfield. And then the next episode contradicted it. Not directly, not with a counterstatement, just by doing what The Simpsons always does, placing the characters in a geographic context that was inconsistent with the briefly revealed location. The show absorbed the accidental revelation the way it absorbs everything else, without acknowledgement and without consequence. But the fan community kept the discovery. And what they found, when they looked at the location the coordinates pointed to, was interesting. The location is real. It exists. It is an actual place in America that has a nuclear power plant near it. A place that has, at various points in its history, been the subject of environmental complaints related to that plant's operations. A place that is, in other words, exactly the kind of place that Springfield seems designed to represent. The show's geographic ambiguity was designed to make Springfield universal, to make it every American town. But there is apparently one specific place that matches Springfield's revealed coordinates. One place that the accidental revelation points to. One place where the theory is not a theory, but a description. The writers have never commented on this. Groening has never commented on this. The coordinates have been neither confirmed nor denied by anyone with official knowledge of the show's creative process. Springfield is everywhere. Springfield is nowhere. And somewhere in America, there is a specific town with specific coordinates that match a specific accidental revelation in a Season 8 episode. And in that town, there is a nuclear power plant. And near that plant, there is a river. And in that river, there may or may not be fish with extra eyes. We don't know. We can't confirm it. The show won't tell us. But the coordinates are there, in the episode, if you look for them. And whatever they mean, whatever they point to, the fan community has been sitting with them for 15 years, holding the question the show refuses to answer. Where is Springfield? Right there. Nowhere. Everywhere. Choose the answer that scares you most. Section 5. Mr. Burns and the Architecture of Immortality. Charles Montgomery Burns is very old. The show has never settled on exactly how old, and the inconsistency is itself informative. Various episodes place his birth date at different points across a span of roughly 4 decades, in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The canonical flashbacks that show Burns as a young man are set in different historical periods in different episodes. His memories include events that span an enormous range of American history. He has clear personal recollections from before the invention of most modern technology. He attended Yale. He served in the Second World War in a capacity that the show characterizes as morally complicated. He knew people who have been dead for most of the show's viewing audience's lifetimes. By even the most conservative estimate, Burns is at least 120 years old. By some readings, he's considerably older, and he is not just alive in a technical, barely functional sense. He runs a corporation, he manipulates politics, he executes complex multi-episode schemes that require long-term planning, attention to detail, and a working command of modern systems. His body is frail and his physical strength approaches zero, but his mind is as sharp and calculating as it has ever been. This should not be possible. The show addresses this through the Springfield Files episode, where it's revealed that Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment of extraordinary intensity. The treatments involve, among other things, radiation therapy so concentrated that it causes Burns's body to emit a visible green glow afterward. The treatments keep him functional for exactly 1 week, after which he requires another dose. Miss one treatment, and his system collapses. His survival is maintained on a 7-day schedule with zero margin for error. The implication of this is significant. Burns's continued existence isn't natural. It isn't even medically conventional. It is an engineered state that requires weekly intervention to sustain. Remove the intervention and Burns dies within days. His life is not being lived so much as it is being administered, one weekly treatment at a time, by a medical protocol that exists nowhere else on Earth. Who developed this protocol? The show doesn't say. Where is it being administered? The show implies it happens somewhere near the plant, in the woods where Burns stumbles afterward in his disoriented glow, but the specific facility is never identified. What does the protocol involve? In detail. The show tells you radiation is part of it and leaves the rest to imagination. The fan community's most developed theory about Burns's immortality involves a private research facility that has been operational beneath or adjacent to the plant for decades. This facility, in the theory's most elaborate version, is where the human remains in the basement came from. Not murder victims exactly, but test subjects. People who consented to or were coerced into experimental life extension procedures that didn't work for them. People whose failures contributed to the data that eventually produced the protocol that keeps Burns alive. Burns, in this reading, has spent a century using others in the process of learning not to die himself. The disease equilibrium is the other piece of the immortality mystery. Burns's doctor delivers one of the show's most famous diagnoses when he tells Burns that Burns has every disease known to medical science simultaneously. Every single one. They are all present in his body at the same time, all actively attempting to kill him, and none of them can succeed because they are all blocking each other. His pancreas wants to fail, but his liver also wants to fail, and his kidneys are also in the process of failing, and his cardiovascular system is also deteriorating, and every disease is stuck in the doorway with every other disease, unable to move, unable to claim its victim, held in permanent biological stalemate. The doctor calls this Three Stooges syndrome. The show presents it as comedy. The audience laughs. But here's what the theory community noticed. This equilibrium, which sounds impossible and is described as extraordinarily rare, is precisely the kind of condition that a sustained low-level radiation protocol might produce. If Burns has been receiving weekly radiation treatments for decades, and if those treatments have gradually saturated his biology with controlled doses of radioactive material, his body might have reached a state of comprehensive damage that has paradoxically become stable. Everything is broken, but broken in such a perfectly balanced way that nothing can break further. The radiation didn't cure him. The radiation broke him so comprehensively and so evenly that his diseases can no longer differentiate themselves from his baseline condition. Burns is kept alive by the same substance that is affecting Springfield. That's the outermost edge of the radiation theory. The plant poisons the town. The plant's output is also, in a carefully managed form, what keeps the plant's owner functioning. Burns and Springfield are locked in the same radioactive dependency. Springfield needs Burns's plant to power its economy. Burns needs the plant's radioactive output to power his continued existence. They are sustaining each other's condition in a closed loop from which neither can exit without the other collapsing. Smithers is the key to all of this. Not just emotionally, not just professionally, but medically. Smithers manages Burns's schedule with the precision and vigilance of someone who knows exactly what happens if the schedule breaks. He monitors Burns's condition. He ensures Burns makes every appointment. He is, in the most literal and practical sense, the person standing between Burns and death on a weekly basis. Remove Smithers, and Burns misses a treatment. Miss a treatment and the equilibrium fails. The equilibrium failing means every disease surges simultaneously, and Burns is consumed by them within days. Smithers is keeping Burns alive. Not through love, though love is part of it. Through knowledge and logistics, and the consistent, tireless management of a medical protocol that requires perfection. The question this raises about Smithers' father, who died in a plant accident that Burns was responsible for, is one the show introduced and has never fully examined. A man whose father was killed by Burns's negligence grew up to become the person whose daily management is the only thing keeping Burns alive. The son of Burns's victim is the architect of Burns's survival. The show put this detail into the world and has never returned to it with the seriousness it deserves. There's a version of this relationship where it's deeply, specifically tragic. Smithers may have known, since he was old enough to understand it, that his devotion to Burns was in some sense a continuation of his father's destruction. His father was consumed by the plant. Smithers gave his life to the plant's owner. The same institution that killed one took the other as its own, in a different way, and the son spent his adult life ensuring that the institution and its owner survived. Whether Smithers made this choice freely, or whether Burns engineered it, is a question the show has been sitting on for 20 years. Burns's wealth provides a final layer to the immortality mystery. His fortune is enormous, and its origins are murky. He inherited some. He built some through the plant. But the scale of his wealth exceeds what either of those sources could plausibly generate. There is money in Burns's fortune that the show has never accounted for. Money from sources that are not the power plant, not ancestral inheritance, not any business that appears on the show's surface. The fan community has proposed that the plant's hidden research facility has been generating revenue for decades, not from power generation, from the sale of things the facility produces that have no legitimate commercial category, things derived from its unusual research programs and its unusual materials, things that would explain both Burns's extraordinary wealth and the presence of human remains in his basement. Burns is too expensive to die. That's the most concise version of the immortality theory. He has built an infrastructure around his own survival that requires a significant financial investment every single week. An investment that requires the plant to keep running, that requires Smithers to keep managing, that requires Springfield to keep paying its power bills, that requires Homer to keep failing to notice the violations. The entire system is oriented toward one outcome. Burns continues to exist, and Burns knows that the moment he dies, the system answers for everything it has done. He stays alive out of self-interest. He stays alive out of fear. He stays alive because dying would mean accountability, and the specific shape of the accounting that would follow his death is, in Burns's estimation, the worst thing that could happen to his legacy. So he books another treatment. Smithers makes the appointment. The plant keeps running. The cooling towers keep smoking. And Mr. Burns keeps going, 1 week at a time, indefinitely. Section 6. Maggie Simpson and the smartest person in Springfield. Maggie Simpson does not speak. 1 word in 36 years, 1 word in approximately 800 episodes. The word is daddy, spoken at the very end of an episode, barely audible, quickly gone, and then the silence resumes as if it never happened. Maggie goes back to the pacifier. The family goes back to not noticing. The show goes back to treating her as the background element, the baby in the corner, the infant who exists to be cute and occasionally to be used as a plot device when the story needs someone who can be carried. The fan community stopped accepting this framing a long time ago. The theory of Maggie as Springfield's most dangerous intelligence has been building for years, supported by a body of canonical evidence that the show has consistently presented and consistently declined to examine. Maggie is a genius. The show has stated this directly in multiple episodes through intelligence assessments and IQ tests and the reactions of educators who encounter her. She scores at a level that testing instruments can't fully measure. She demonstrates cognitive abilities that no infant should possess. She does things that, if done by an adult, would be considered impressive. She does them before she's learned to walk reliably. She has picked locks that would challenge an adult with proper tools and training. She has organized collective action among a group of infants in a daycare facility, communicating complex plans without language, executing multi-stage operations that required timing and coordination. She has saved Homer's life on multiple occasions through interventions that required reading a situation, identifying a solution, and executing it precisely. She plays musical instruments with a proficiency that suggests formal training she has never received. She demonstrates emotional intelligence and strategic awareness that consistently exceed those of the adults around her. And she says nothing. She watches. She listens. She processes everything. She says nothing. The silence is the key to understanding Maggie, and the key to understanding the silence is Lisa. Maggie has grown up watching her older sister. She has watched Lisa be brilliant, articulate, passionate, and perpetually exhaustingly frustrated. She has watched Lisa identify problems, propose solutions, build arguments, make cases, and be ignored. She has watched Lisa be the smartest person in every room she enters and be treated with less respect than people who are openly wrong in those same rooms. She has watched Springfield respond to Lisa's intelligence with dismissal, mockery, and occasional cruelty. She has watched the smartest person in her family be made smaller every day by the effort of announcing herself into a void that doesn't respond. Maggie watched all of this, processed all of it and reached a conclusion that Lisa has never quite reached. Visibility is a liability. The smarter you are in Springfield, the more you have to lose by being seen as smart. The safest position is the one nobody considers a position at all. A baby is invisible. A baby who doesn't speak is not just invisible, she's below the threshold of consideration. Nobody edits themselves around a baby. Nobody watches what they say or does what they do differently because there's an infant in the room. People say everything in front of Maggie. They plan in front of her, confess in front of her, reveal in front of her. She is present for more of Springfield's actual life than any other character because she's the only one nobody is performing for. The theory holds that Maggie's silence is not a developmental lag or a quirk of the show's format. It is a strategic decision made by an intelligence sophisticated enough to recognize that the benefits of speaking are vastly outweighed by the costs, at least for now, at least until she has decided what she intends to do with what she knows. The shooting of Burns becomes, under this theory, something more complex than a baby accidentally discharging a firearm during a struggle over candy. We discuss this in the Burns section, and we'll build on it here. Maggie, in the closing moments of the Who Shot Mr. Burns episode, is left alone in the room after the investigation has concluded. She looks around carefully. She checks that nobody is watching, and then she mimics the motion of pulling a trigger. The show frames this as dark comedy. It implies Maggie's guilt in a playful way. The audience laughs at the idea of this tiny infant being the culprit and then goes home. But watch the sequence specifically with the intelligence theory in mind. That's not a baby randomly moving her mouth. That's a deliberate reenactment of a specific action performed only when the baby believes she is unobserved. The situational awareness required for that sequence, the check to confirm she's alone, the choice to perform the gesture only in private, requires understanding that what she did has significance, that others knowing she did it would have consequences, and that concealment is the appropriate response. Those are not infant behaviors. Those are sophisticated social behaviors that require theory of mind, executive function, and impulse control. A baby who reenacts the trigger pull only when she's confirmed she's alone is not confessing accidentally. She's choosing a private moment for a private gesture, the way someone might allow themselves a small expression of something they never intend to show publicly. She did what she did. She knows what she did. She has decided that keeping it private is optimal. And she is 1 year old. The Longest Daycare, the theatrical short film that is probably the most direct, sustained examination of Maggie's intelligence the show has ever produced, shows her solving physical and social problems at a level that would be impressive in a 10-year-old. She navigates a system of rules she didn't design, identifies the system's weaknesses, develops workarounds, builds alliances, executes a plan with multiple stages, adapts when the plan encounters obstacles, and succeeds. She does all of this in service of protecting something she has decided matters, a butterfly that a bully wants to destroy. The butterfly is the emotional key. Maggie's intelligence is formidable, but the first thing she chooses to apply it to is not self-advancement, not strategic positioning, not information collection. It's protection. Something small and beautiful is being threatened, and Maggie commits her full capability to preventing that. The intelligence in service of protecting something that can't protect itself. This is who Maggie is. Not a sleeping giant waiting to conquer. A sleeping giant waiting to protect. She has been watching Springfield and understanding Springfield, accumulating an understanding of the systems and structures and people of this town, not because she plans to dismantle them, but because she plans to protect her family from them when the time comes. What is she waiting for? The show has never said. The fan community has theories, ranging from the mundane, she's waiting to be old enough to be taken seriously, to the much larger. She's waiting for Burns's infrastructure to become vulnerable in a way that she and only she can exploit. What all the theories share is the conviction that Maggie's endgame exists and is being planned, that the silence is not passivity but preparation, and that when it breaks, Springfield will not have seen it coming. How could they? They've been looking at a baby. Section 7. The Simpsons Predictions. In the year 2000, an episode aired in which Lisa Simpson becomes President of the United States, and her predecessor is identified as Donald Trump. The episode frames the Trump presidency as a joke, a casual throwaway reference to a ridiculous hypothetical, a satirical flourish. 16 years later, Donald Trump was elected President of the United States. The internet collectively lost its mind. The Simpsons predicted Trump became one of the most viral memes of 2016 and has remained in circulation ever since. Screenshots circulated of Homer Simpson operating a malfunctioning voting machine. Clips circulated of Trump's name being used as the punchline of a joke about the absurd direction of American celebrity culture. The show had made this prediction 16 years in advance, and the internet needed an explanation. The explanation the internet largely settled on involved some combination of the following options. The writers are time travelers. The show is a vehicle for predictive programming by some secretive group with foreknowledge of future events. The writers have connections to intelligence agencies, or the show operates under some form of mystical creative insight that allows its writers to pierce the veil of time. The actual explanation is less exciting but more interesting. The Simpsons writing staff is, by any reasonable measure, one of the most educated and intellectually capable collections of writers ever assembled in American television. Multiple writers hold degrees from Harvard and other elite universities. Many have backgrounds in mathematics, computer science, economics, and political science. They are extraordinarily well-read, extraordinarily well-connected, and extraordinarily attentive to the world around them. And they have been producing a show about American culture, politics, and society for 36 years, which means they have been reading the cultural data and extrapolating from it continuously at a very high level of sophistication for a very long time. When the year 2000 episode was written, Donald Trump had been publicly flirting with running for president since the late 1980s. He had made formal exploratory moves toward a presidential campaign. He was a prominent cultural figure whose name was already associated, in the public imagination, with excess, celebrity, and political ambition. The writers of The Simpsons looked at this and made an observation that any sufficiently attentive person could have made. If the logic of American celebrity politics continues in the direction it's heading, a Trump presidency is not an absurd destination. That's not prophecy. That's extrapolation. Smart extrapolation, applied consistently, applied by smart people, over a long period of time, produces a body of work that will, inevitably, overlap with the future in ways that feel like more than coincidence. But then there are the specific ones. The Trump prediction didn't just predict that a celebrity businessman would become president. It depicted him descending an escalator as part of his announcement. The real announcement, in 2015, involved Trump descending an escalator in Trump Tower. The visual specificity of that overlap goes beyond what extrapolation should be able to produce. You can extrapolate that a celebrity will run for president. You cannot extrapolate the specific staging of their announcement 15 years in the future. There are others like this. Not many, but enough to constitute a pattern that resists clean dismissal. Specific visual details. Specific outcomes that don't follow from any obvious trend analysis. Specific configurations of events that feel less like trend projection and more like something had been seen in advance. The show's response to these questions, when its writers and producers have been asked directly, is consistent. Volume explains most of it. Confirmation bias explains the rest. You remember the hits. You don't remember the misses. With close to 800 episodes in the archive, each containing dozens of satirical references to technology, politics, culture, and society, the number of things the show has guessed correctly is numerically unremarkable, given the total number of guesses it has made. This is true. It is also incomplete, because the prediction phenomenon isn't just about accuracy. It's about the show's relationship to American culture over time. The Simpsons has been the most watched, most quoted, most shared animated series in American history for most of its run. Its images and references are part of the vocabulary of American life. When it makes a joke about something, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people see it. It becomes a reference point. It shapes how people think about the thing being joked about. The show that made a Trump presidency into a punchline didn't just predict the presidency. It made the presidency feel, when it arrived, like something that had already happened in some sense. Something remembered from a joke. Something whose absurdity had already been processed and filed under familiar. The cultural preparation that The Simpsons provided didn't make Trump's election more likely in any direct causal sense, but it made it feel less unprecedented, less shocking, less like something that couldn't be absorbed. This is the meta-theory, the one that explains the prediction phenomenon more satisfyingly than either coincidence or conspiracy. The Simpsons doesn't predict the future. The Simpsons shapes how the future lands when it arrives. By presenting the cultural anxieties and political trajectories of American life as comedy, by making the worst-case scenarios into familiar jokes, the show has been preparing its audience for futures it hopes will never come, while making those futures feel survivable if they do. The three-eyed fish appeared in a real body of water in Argentina after years of being famous as a Simpsons reference. Was this the fish predicting reality, or reality imitating the fish? When you name something, when you make it visible and specific and culturally present, you make it easier for people to recognize when they see it in the real world. The three-eyed fish became a thing people knew to look for. And when something that looked like it appeared, the connection was immediately made. The show made itself a lens through which its audience now views certain aspects of reality. That's not prophecy. That's cultural influence at a scale that very few creative works have ever achieved, and it produces an effect that, from the outside, looks uncannily like prediction. There are still the specific ones, the ones where the detail is too exact. The writing staff has never fully explained those, and the fan community has never fully stopped asking about them. They probably never will. Some mysteries are best maintained in a state of productive ambiguity, where the asking of the question is more valuable than any answer would be. The Simpsons wrote so many possible futures that some of them were bound to arrive. And when they arrived wearing familiar clothes. And even when you understand exactly how the trick works, it's still genuinely impressive to watch. Section 8. Mona Simpson and the Conspiracy That Broke 3 Generations. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the official story. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, told his son that his mother had died when Homer was very young. He showed Homer a gravestone. Homer mourned, in the vague and incomplete way that people mourn for parents they barely knew. He grew up believing he was a boy whose mother left through death, and that belief became the load-bearing wall of his emotional architecture. His need for approval, his terror of abandonment, his willingness to absorb humiliation rather than risk losing the stable things in his life, his compulsive warmth toward people he loves. All of it is the shape that love takes when it grows up in the space where a mother was supposed to be. In Season 7, the show revealed that the space wasn't created by death. It was created by Burns. Mona Simpson was not dead. She had been living as a fugitive for 27 years, moving between sympathizer networks, using assumed names, staying one step ahead of a decades-long pursuit funded by the wealthiest man in Springfield. She had been forced out of her life, out of her marriage, out of her son's childhood, by a grudge that Charles Montgomery Burns had been maintaining since 1969. The story of why begins with a biological weapons laboratory, not a nuclear facility, not a power plant. A laboratory designing and producing biological weapons, owned and operated by Burns, located in Springfield. The same town where he would later build his nuclear plant. The same town where Homer was growing up. The same town where families were living their ordinary lives, entirely unaware that the richest man in their community was running a germ warfare program down the road. Mona was radicalized. She had been a housewife, ordinary in all the ways that word implies, until the world outside her domestic life became impossible to ignore. She joined a group of activists, became involved in direct action, and participated in a raid on Burns's biological weapons facility. The raid was successful. The materials inside were destroyed. The facility was rendered inoperable. During the chaos of the retreat, Mona stopped to help someone who had fallen. The person was Burns. She stopped to help the man whose weapons she had just destroyed, and Burns looked up at her face and saw her clearly, and the pursuit began. The FBI was notified. Burns's connections ensured a full investigation. Mona couldn't go home. She kissed Homer goodbye while he was sleeping, 6 years old and unaware, and disappeared into the night. Homer woke up and his mother was gone. Abe told him she was dead. And Homer spent the next 30 years of his life carrying the weight of that absence without knowing what had put it there. Here is what the conspiracy version of this story looks like when you lay it out cleanly. Burns was running a biological weapons facility in a residential town. The facility was destroyed by activists. Burns used his political connections to turn the U.S. federal government into an instrument of personal revenge, making one woman a fugitive for 27 years over what amounted to a protest action. The destruction of Mona's family was not a side effect of his pursuit of her. It was the most effective revenge available. He couldn't punish Mona directly while she was in hiding. He could ensure that her son grew up damaged. And Homer did grow up damaged. Not in the dramatic, visible way of a character in a tragedy, but in the specific, functional way of a person who learned early that love can disappear without explanation, and that the safest emotional position is a kind of perpetual gratitude for whatever you're given. Homer doesn't make demands of Burns. Homer doesn't ask why he's treated with contempt. Homer absorbs it and returns the next day because the alternative, losing the job, losing the stable center of his adult life, activates a fear that was installed in him when he was 6 years old, and his mother didn't come back. Burns built the perfect employee through the destruction of a family. When Mona returned in season 7, Burns recognized her almost immediately. He spotted her through a cab window. He made the call. The FBI came to the Simpson house. Mona had to run again, and Homer had to say goodbye to his mother for the second time, and this time he was old enough to know what he was losing and why. He knew, after that, who was responsible. He knew that the man who signed his paychecks was the man who had taken his mother from him twice. He knew the shape of what Burns had done to his family across 30 years. He went back to work the next week. This is the most important and most devastating detail in the entire Mona Simpson storyline. Homer knows. He has known since season 7. And he does nothing. He doesn't confront Burns. He doesn't quit. He doesn't make the connection explicit in any conversation that the show records. He goes back to his desk in Sector 7G and he eats his donut, and he fails to notice the violations, and he cashes his paycheck from the man who broke his childhood. The fan community has 2 readings of this. One holds that Homer's cognitive impairment, the crayon, the radiation, the cumulative damage of decades of exposure, genuinely prevents him from making and holding the connection. His brain cannot sustain the full architecture of what was done to him. He can experience the grief of each moment individually, the reunion, the goodbye, the death in a later season, but he cannot construct the full narrative that would make Burns the cause of all of it. The other reading is that Homer knows and has chosen, in the specific, quiet, devastating way that people sometimes choose, not to know. That looking directly at what Burns did to his family would require Homer to do something about it, and doing something about it would mean risking everything he has built in the shadow of what Burns took from him. The house, the family, the job that was guaranteed to him through a deal between Burns and Abe that Homer doesn't fully understand but that he knows exists, all of it sits within Burns's sphere. None of it can be preserved if Homer becomes the enemy of the man who controls it. So Homer goes to work, every morning, 3 decades and counting. He drives past the cooling towers and he clocks in, and he falls asleep at his workstation, and he collects his paycheck from the man who stole his mother, and he goes home to the family he has built inside the ruins of what Burns left behind. Mona died eventually. She died in Homer's presence, and the show gave the death the weight it deserved, which is rare for a show that has spent most of its run treating death as something that resets by the next episode. Homer sat with her. He held her hand. There were no jokes. There was no cutaway. There was just the accumulated weight of 27 stolen years and the specific inadequacy of the time they finally got together. Her last act was a mission. A final piece of activism. One more strike against the system she had spent her life opposing. Homer completed it on her behalf. It worked. Whatever she had been trying to accomplish, she accomplished it, in some sense, through him. And then the show moved on. Burns was still there. The plant was still running. Homer was back at his desk by the following episode. The conspiracy didn't end with Mona's death. Conspiracies don't end with deaths. They end when the systems that sustain them are dismantled. And nothing in the history of The Simpsons suggests that the system Burns built has ever been seriously threatened. 3 generations of Simpsons have been broken by it. The 4th, Bart and Lisa and Maggie, are growing up inside it right now. The loop continues. There is a specific medical question about Burns that the show introduced and has never resolved, and it concerns what happens to his mind. Burns's body is a ruin held together by weekly intervention. His diseases are in equilibrium. His cellular function is maintained through external radioactive input. All of this we've covered. But his mind operates at a level of clarity and strategic sophistication that his body's condition doesn't explain. His body is ancient. His mind is not. His mind is as sharp, as calculating, as strategically ruthless as it has ever been, possibly sharper than it was in his youth because it has been operating at high capacity for more than a century and has had time to develop a comprehensive understanding of the systems it manipulates. How is this possible? The brain is an organ. It is subject to aging the way other organs are subject to aging. A man of Burns's apparent biological age should be experiencing cognitive decline, if not outright dementia. His memory should be fragmenting. His reasoning should be slowing. His capacity for the complex, long-term scheming that characterizes his behavior throughout the show should be diminishing. It isn't. He is, cognitively, in the prime of his operational life, even as his physical form continues its extraordinary decay. The fan community's answer involves the radiation treatments again. The same weekly protocol that keeps his diseases in equilibrium and his body technically functioning may also be maintaining his neural architecture. Controlled radiation exposure, in the specific formulations that Burns's treatments employ, may be doing something to his brain tissue that normal human biology cannot do, maintaining the synaptic structures that produce complex reasoning, keeping the neural connections active and regenerating that would otherwise deteriorate with age? If this is true, Burns's treatments aren't just keeping him alive, they're keeping him sharp. They're maintaining the cognitive instrument that he uses to keep everything else running. And removing the treatments wouldn't just kill his body, it would dim his mind first. The strategic genius that has operated Springfield's management system for over a century would go before the body gave out, and Burns knows this, and it is possibly the thing he fears most. A man of Burns's intelligence, facing the possibility of cognitive decline, would do everything in his power to prevent it. He would maintain the treatments at all costs. He would ensure the supply of whatever radioactive material the treatments require, which means ensuring the plant continues to operate, which means ensuring Homer stays in Sector 7G failing to report violations, which means ensuring the town remains economically dependent, which means ensuring the geographic ambiguity prevents outside regulatory intervention. It all comes back to the mind. Burns's empire is an extension of his intelligence. Without the intelligence, the empire cannot sustain itself. Without the treatments, the intelligence goes. Without the plant, the treatments fail. Without Homer, the plant would be shut down within a week. Homer's job protects the plant. The plant enables the treatments maintain the mind runs the empire employs Homer. It's a closed loop with Burns's consciousness at the center, and every element of Springfield's infrastructure exists to keep that consciousness running. The Maggie theory has a specific implication that the show has spent 36 years carefully avoiding, and it concerns what happens when Maggie's patience finally runs out. The fan community has spent considerable time on the question of what Maggie is waiting for. The theories range from the mundane, she's waiting until she can speak fluently enough to make her intelligence legible to the adults around her, to the dramatic, she's waiting for a specific vulnerability in Burns's infrastructure that will allow a decisive strike. But all of these theories share an assumption that deserves examination. They assume Maggie is playing a long game with a specific endpoint. What if she isn't? What if the waiting isn't strategic patience toward a specific goal, but something more open-ended? What if Maggie is waiting not for the right moment to act, but for the right understanding of what action is even possible? Maggie is, under this theory, the most intelligent person in Springfield, but she is also the person with the least information about the world beyond Springfield. She has never left. She has never had a conversation that the show has recorded. She has never been given access to the kind of adult knowledge that would allow her to contextualize what she observes. She can see the patterns. She can identify the system. She cannot yet conceive of the mechanism that would break it, because she has never had access to a model of how systems break. Lisa has that problem too, but Lisa at least has books, teachers, access to broader cultural information. Lisa can imagine change because she can read about change. She can envision alternative possibilities because she has been given a vocabulary for alternative possibilities. Maggie has the pacifier and the high chair and the show's 36 years of collective silence about her inner life. Under this reading, Maggie isn't waiting for the right moment. She's waiting for the right education. She's waiting to be old enough, or she's waiting for someone to treat her as intelligent enough to give her the information she needs to turn her extraordinary perceptive capacity into something actionable. And here's the disturbing implication. The moment that education arrives, if it ever does, the moment someone sits down with Maggie Simpson and talks to her like the mind she is, rather than the infant the show requires her to appear to be, the game changes. Not because Maggie will immediately dismantle Burns's empire, but because Maggie, with full information and the cognitive capacity she already possesses, will be the first person in Springfield's history who actually understands what's being done to her family. And the first person who truly understands will be the first person who can do something about it. The show will never get there. The show can't get there, because getting there means Maggie stops being a baby and starts being a character with agency and trajectory, and that breaks the floating timeline and the reset mechanism and the whole structure that allows the show to keep running indefinitely. But the potential is there, in every episode, in those watching eyes, in the silence that knows more than it's saying. Maggie Simpson is the unsolved mystery of The Simpsons. Not the shooting, not the geography, not the coma. Maggie, what she knows, what she'll do, who she is when the show finally, if ever, lets her be that. The predictions section deserves one more layer that puts the whole phenomenon in a different frame entirely. There is a specific category of Simpsons prediction that doesn't get discussed as often as the Trump escalator or the smartwatch, and that's the predictions the show made about itself. The predictions about its own longevity, its own cultural status, its own relationship to American life. In the early seasons of the show, there are jokes, meta-jokes, self-aware moments in which the show contemplates its own future. Jokes about the show running forever. Jokes about characters being trapped in their own narrative indefinitely. Jokes about the impossibility of the premise sustaining itself across decades. These jokes were made in the early 1990s, when the show was new and its longevity was uncertain, and they were made as jokes, not as predictions. The show has now been running for 36 years. Those jokes are no longer jokes. They're accurate descriptions of what happened. The show that joked about running forever is the show that has run the longest in American television history. The show that joked about its characters being trapped in amber is the show whose characters have literally been frozen in amber for over 3 decades. The Simpsons predicted The Simpsons. It saw itself clearly in those early meta moments, and what it saw looked exactly like what it became. And nobody talks about this in the prediction discussion, because predicting yourself feels less remarkable than predicting the outside world. But it might be the most remarkable prediction of all. Because to accurately predict your own future, you have to understand something about your own nature at a level that most creative works don't achieve. You have to see past the moment of creation to the full arc of what you're making. The Simpsons saw that arc. It saw the immortality and the stasis and the endless repetition and the cultural permanence, and it made jokes about them, and then it became them. That's either an extraordinary act of creative self-awareness, or it's the show understanding, at some level, that the loop was already running from the moment the first episode aired. That the trap was built into the structure from the beginning. That the writers, in those early meta-jokes, weren't predicting the future. They were describing the present. The show has always been this. The floating timeline and the reset button and the immortal characters and the town that never changes have been there since episode 1. The self-aware jokes in the early seasons weren't prophecy. They were the show catching a glimpse of its own face in the mirror and describing what it saw. What it saw looked like Springfield. What it described looked like America. And what it became looked like both. Let's spend some time with the question of what the Mona Simpson storyline actually accomplished within the narrative, because there's an argument to be made that it's the most important storyline in the show's history, more important than the shooting, more important than the coma, more important than any of the individual mysteries we've discussed. The Mona storyline is where the show makes its fullest statement about what power does to families. Not abstractly, not satirically, not through the comfortable distance of comedy. In the Mona episodes, the show says directly, with whatever sincerity it can muster, that the powerful destroy the powerless in specific, trackable ways, and that the destruction passes down through generations, and that the people who are destroyed often cannot see clearly enough to understand what destroyed them. Homer doesn't understand. He experiences the grief. He experiences the reunion and the goodbye, and the loss, and the death. But he cannot construct the full narrative that would make his suffering legible to him as political fact rather than personal misfortune. He doesn't know that his relationship with his own limitations was engineered. He doesn't know that the crayon and the radiation and the absence of his mother are connected by a single thread that runs back to Burns. He knows each element separately, in the way you can know 3 puzzle pieces without seeing the picture. The Mona storyline is the show telling us the picture exists. It's the show saying, as clearly as it can without breaking its own format, that what happened to Homer Simpson is not the result of bad luck or personal failing or the ordinary chaos of a working-class life. It's the result of a deliberate system that required a broken Homer Simpson to function as designed. And then the show continues, and Homer goes back to the plant. And Burns is still there, and the system keeps running. Because the show is not a revolutionary document, it's a portrait. A very long, very detailed, very honest portrait of a specific kind of powerlessness. The kind that doesn't know its powerlessness. The kind that has been so thoroughly managed for so long that the managed person has come to experience the management as the natural conditions of their life. Homer's tragedy, at its fullest, is not that he works for the man who took his mother. His tragedy is that he works for the man who took his mother and will never fully know it and will not die knowing it. And the show will not allow us to watch him come to know it because the knowledge would change everything, and the show cannot afford to change everything. Mona knew. She spent her life fighting because she knew. Homer doesn't know. He spends his life working because he doesn't. And in the gap between the mother who knew and the son who doesn't, 30 years of history sits, unacknowledged, waiting for someone capable of bridging the distance. Maybe that's what Maggie is waiting for. Not Burns, not the plant, not some specific vulnerability in the infrastructure. Maybe she's waiting until she has the words to tell her father what was done to him. Maybe that's the word she's been holding on to since 1989. The show will never give us that scene, but the architecture for it has been in place for 3 decades, and the fan community knows it, and every once in a while, in a late-night comment section somewhere, someone says, "What if Maggie tells Homer? What if she finally speaks, and what she says is everything Mona died trying to make legible?" The show doesn't go there. It never has. But the potential is there, in the structure. In the relationship between a silent baby and an unknowing father, and a conspiracy that broke their family before either of them was old enough to do anything about it. That potential, unresolved and probably unresolvable, is the beating heart of what makes The Simpsons more than a cartoon. It's the show's deepest secret. Not who shot Burns, not where Springfield is, not whether Homer is dreaming. It's the question of whether the people who were broken will ever know what broke them, and whether knowing would help. And whether, even knowing, they could do anything at all. There is a specific element of the floating timeline mystery that the fan community has identified but rarely discusses in the same breath as the other theories, and that's the question of what the floating timeline does to memory within the show's universe. The characters of The Simpsons do not have consistent memories. This is not a production oversight. It's structurally inherent to the floating timeline. If Homer and Marge's backstory updates every few years to keep pace with the character's perpetual middle age, then Homer and Marge's memories of their own past must also update. They must remember things that, in earlier episodes, they didn't remember. They must forget things that earlier episodes showed them experiencing. This means the characters in The Simpsons have unstable memories. Their personal histories are not fixed. They change. The memories they have now are not the same memories they had in earlier seasons. And within the show's universe, this is not experienced as a disruption. Homer doesn't notice that his memory of his high school years has shifted from the 1970s to the 1990s. He just has the memory he has, whatever it is, currently, and it feels continuous and complete to him even though it isn't. This connects to the radiation theory in a specific way. The neurological effects of chronic radiation exposure include memory disruption, not just difficulty forming new memories, but instability in existing memories, the rewiring of recalled experiences in ways that feel natural and complete to the person experiencing them. A population that has been drinking mildly radioactive water for decades might develop exactly this kind of memory instability, a persistent, low-level disruption of the autobiographical memory that makes the past feel continuously present even as it quietly shifts. Springfield's residents don't notice the timeline shifting because their memories shift with it. They always remember things the way they're currently supposed to be remembered. The cognitive impairment that Burns's plant has cultivated in the population extends to memory architecture, ensuring that nobody in Springfield has a stable enough autobiographical record to notice when the record changes. Burns himself, who manages his radiation exposure carefully and whose cognitive function is being actively maintained, presumably has more stable memories. He probably remembers the 1970s as the 1970s and can trace the shift in the town's collective memory over time. He has watched Springfield's population update its past again and again without noticing, and this, perhaps more than the physical mutations and the economic dependency, is what gives him confidence that the system will continue to run. He has not just managed their present, he has managed their past. A population that cannot hold its own history cannot construct a critique of that history. A population whose memories update to match current conditions cannot accumulate the evidence required to make a case against the conditions themselves. The floating timeline is, in this reading, not just a narrative convenience. It's the most complete expression of what the radiation has done. Springfield's people live in a perpetual present that is always changing and always feels like it has always been this way. They cannot remember Springfield before the plant because the plant has been managing their memories of before the plant for decades. There is no before the plant in Springfield's collective memory. There has only ever been the plant and the town that grew up around it, and the billionaire who owns it all. The before has been erased, not through censorship or propaganda, but through the subtle, persistent, invisible corruption of the cognitive machinery that stores the past. And without the past, there is no before and after. There is only now, always now. Springfield's eternal present. The floating timeline isn't a narrative feature, it's the town's condition. The final section's grand unified theory deserves one more pass, because there's a dimension of the company town reading that we haven't yet explored. What it implies about the audience's relationship to Springfield. If Springfield is a company town, and we are the audience watching Springfield, then our relationship to Springfield is analogous to the relationship of the outside world to a real company town. We can see what's happening inside. We have more information than the people inside. We can identify the patterns, trace the system, name the beneficiary. We are, in a specific sense, in the position of the federal investigators who could come in and change things if the jurisdiction weren't perpetually shifting. And we choose not to. We tune in every week. We watch the plant run and the fish mutate and Homer fail to connect the dots and Burns glowing in the woods. We see it clearly. We understand what we're seeing. And then we come back next week because we love the family, because we love Springfield, because the show gives us something that we need. We are complicit, not maliciously, not even consciously, but our spectatorship is what sustains the system. The show cannot run without an audience. The audience cannot leave without losing something they value. So the audience stays, and the show runs, and Springfield perpetuates itself. The loop includes us. We are the mechanism. We are the viewers who watched the three-eyed fish episode and found it funny rather than alarming. We are the people who have sat through 36 years of evidence that something is deeply wrong in this town and kept coming back because the family is there and we need the family to be there. We have been inside the show's logic as surely as the residents of Springfield have been inside the plant's logic, sustained by the same dependency, maintained by the same need, kept returning by the same combination of love and habit, and the specific comfort of a world that stays the same. The grand unified theory of Springfield is not just about Burns or the plant or the radiation or the coma. It's about all of us who have been watching for 36 years and what our watching means. It's about the show asking, from the very beginning, what we're willing to see and what we'd rather not look at. It's about the choice we make every time we turn on the television and go back to Springfield, knowing what Springfield is, knowing what the plant does, knowing that the fish have three eyes and the water carries things it shouldn't and the billionaire glows in the woods. We go back because the family is there, because love is there, imperfect and loud and constantly under threat and constantly surviving. Because Homer Simpson is stumbling through the door at 5:30 after another day at the plant, and Marge is in the kitchen, and Bart is doing something inadvisable, and Lisa is reading something nobody else in the family will understand, and Maggie is watching everything with those enormous knowing eyes. Because the house on Evergreen Terrace is still standing. Because the lights are still on. Because whatever Springfield is, whatever the system has done to the family inside it, the family keeps happening. Every episode. Every week. The family keeps happening, and the love keeps being real, and the couch keeps receiving them, and the TV keeps playing, and the joke keeps landing, and the warmth keeps being true. That's why we stay. Not because we don't see the cooling towers. We see them. We've always seen them. We stay because the family on the other side of the cooling towers is worth seeing too, and the show has known this about us since episode 1, and it uses this knowledge to keep us coming back, and we come back willingly, gratefully, every time. The loop holds. It holds because we hold it, and we hold it because we love them, and we love them because they're us. End of full expanded script. 4 hours of Simpsons mysteries no one can solve. Section 9. The Principal and the Pauper. In September 1997, The Simpsons aired an episode that its own creative community considers, to this day, the most controversial in the show's history. Not the most offensive. Not the most explicit. The most controversial, in the specific sense of having divided the audience, the writers, and the critics in a way that no other episode has. The episode is called The Principal and the Pauper, and what it does is simple and devastating. It reveals that Seymour Skinner, Springfield's principal, has been living under a stolen identity for 20 years. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. The real Seymour Skinner was his commanding officer in Vietnam. When the real Skinner was captured and declared missing in action, Tamzarian returned to Springfield to inform Skinner's mother of her son's probable death. Agnes Skinner, grieving and in need, assumed he was her son. He went along with it. He became Seymour Skinner in every sense, absorbed his predecessor's identity, and lived that life for 2 decades until the real Skinner, who had survived captivity and found his way home, walked through the door. The town has to confront the truth. And the truth is that the man who has been running their school, raising his mother, interacting with their children, existing as a familiar and trusted presence in their community, is not who he said he was. Springfield holds a meeting. The real Skinner is present. Tamzarian is present. The evidence is unambiguous. And the town votes, not on prosecution, not on how to right the wrong. The town votes on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. They vote to keep the lie. A judge signs an order declaring Tamzarian to be the legal Seymour Skinner. The real Skinner is tied to a train and physically removed from Springfield. It becomes, by judicial decree, illegal to ever speak of the truth again, on pain of torture. The real Seymour Skinner, a man who survived a prisoner of war camp, who came home to find his life stolen, who presented himself honestly and asked only to be recognized, is expelled from the community by legal force. Fans were furious when this episode aired. They have remained furious. It consistently ranks among the worst episodes in the show's history. Critics argue that it destroyed a beloved character's backstory, that it treated continuity with contempt, that it was lazy and disrespectful to the audience. They're not wrong about any of that. The episode does all of those things, but it also does something else. Something the fans who hate it tend to overlook, because they're focused on what it did to Skinner. It shows you Springfield's operating system. Every other time Springfield resets, every other time a major event is forgotten, every other time the town absorbs a catastrophe and returns to baseline with no memory of having done so, it happens off-screen. Between episodes, in the gap where causality should live but doesn't. You watch the episode, you see the disaster, and then the next episode begins and the disaster is gone, and you're expected to accept that as the nature of the format. The Principal and the Pauper shows you the mechanism in real time. It shows you a community encountering an uncomfortable truth and making, explicitly and publicly, the choice to reject it. They don't forget. They vote. There is a meeting, there is a process, there is a legal instrument. Springfield doesn't stumble into denial. Springfield chooses it, formalizes it, and criminalizes the alternative. That is a different thing than narrative convenience. That is a portrait of a community's values. And the values are clear. Comfortable fiction is more valuable than true accounting. The person who has been performing a role for 20 years is more valuable than the person who has the legitimate claim to the role. The discomfort of revision is more costly than the dishonesty of continuation, and anyone who insists on the truth, anyone who shows up with evidence and demands that the evidence be reckoned with, will be removed. The real Skinner was Springfield's most honest man, and Springfield put him on a train. This episode is not the worst episode of The Simpsons. This episode is the most important one because it's the only one that maps the town's relationship to reality in explicit, visible detail. Every other mystery we've discussed in this video, the plant's violations being ignored, the three-eyed fish being absorbed without investigation, the geography that doesn't hold, the history that was fabricated, the shooting that was pinned on an infant, all of it is the same mechanism. All of it is Springfield doing exactly what it does in this episode. The difference is that in this episode, you get to watch them do it. There's one more thing worth noting about Armin Tamzarian, which is what his choice says about the pressure Springfield exerts on the people inside it. He didn't become Seymour Skinner for malicious reasons. He became Skinner because a grieving mother needed someone to hold on to, and he was there, and the alternative was leaving her with nothing. He stepped into the identity because the identity needed filling. He continued it because once you've become someone in a place like Springfield, the place won't let you stop being that person. Springfield needed a principal. Springfield needed Seymour Skinner. Armin Tamzarian was the available material. The town shaped him into the role and then issued a legal order to ensure he couldn't leave it. The question this raises is one the show has never answered. What other roles does Springfield need filled? What other people have been shaped by the town's requirements into something they didn't choose to be? Homer at the plant is one answer, Ned as the neighbor is another. The question is how many others there are. How many people in Springfield are living lives that the system selected for them rather than lives they selected for themselves? The Principal and the Pauper is the episode that makes this question unavoidable. And the town's response to that question, given the vote and the judicial order and the man on the train, is as clear as it has ever been. Ask the question quietly, or don't ask it at all. Section 10. The floating timeline and the loop we built ourselves. Bart Simpson was 10 years old in 1989. He is 10 years old now. That sentence contains within it one of the strangest things about long-running television. 36 years of real time have passed. Thousands of days. Multiple generations of viewers have grown up, had children of their own, and introduced those children to a show where the child at the center is still the same age as when the grandparents first watched it. Bart Simpson has not aged one day. Lisa has not aged one day. Maggie, who was approximately 1 year old when the show began, is still approximately 1 year old. The parents of a 36-year-old show are still, somehow, young adults. The industry term for this is a floating timeline. The present of the story is always now, always contemporary, always the current moment, but the characters don't accumulate time in a way that would make the present impossible. Technology updates. Cultural references update. The world around The Simpsons is recognizably the current world, whatever year it happens to be when the episode airs. But the people at the center of it stay the same age they were when the cameras first turned on. This is usually discussed as a pragmatic narrative choice. You can't have Bart turn 40 while still making episodes about Bart being a kid. The floating timeline is the solution. It's common enough in long-running animated shows that most viewers accept it without thinking about it. The fan community thought about it. The problem with the floating timeline, when you actually sit with it, isn't that the characters don't age. It's what the characters' non-aging implies about their internal experience of time. If Bart is always 10, Bart doesn't remember being 9. He doesn't have a past that accumulates into a present. He has a present that perpetually is. He doesn't anticipate being 11. He exists in a continuous now that never advances and never recedes. This is not how time works for conscious beings. Conscious beings have memory. They have anticipation. They know they were other ages once and will be other ages in the future. The characters of The Simpsons don't have this. Their relationship to time is structurally different from a real person's relationship to time, and that structural difference, once you notice it, is very difficult to unsee. The coma theory explains this as a symptom of Homer's unconscious mind holding the dream in stasis. The radiation theory explains it as a consequence of cellular mutation affecting the character's biological aging processes in ways that the normal rules of time don't fully apply to. The loop theory, which we introduced in the section on Burns, explains it as a function of whatever temporal anomaly has settled over Springfield and continues to hold it in place, cycling the town through an endless sequence of present moments that all feel like now. The most emotionally honest explanation is also the most uncomfortable one. The characters don't age because we won't let them, not the writers. We, the audience. The show has imagined older versions of the Simpson children multiple times. Lisa as a young adult woman, brilliant and searching and lonely. Bart as a middle-aged man, somehow both sadder and more recognizable than his 10-year-old self. The show can imagine these futures. It has visited them. It has found them and rendered them with care and specificity and genuine emotion. And then it comes back. The future closes. The children are young again. The present reestablishes itself. We come back to watch the show. We come back because the show is the version of Springfield that still exists, the one where the house is intact and the family is together, and Homer is coming home after his shift at the plant, and the kids are doing their homework. And Marge is in the kitchen, and the Saturday morning is still a Saturday morning. We come back to that because the alternative, the passage of time, the growing up, the growing old, the emptying of the house on Evergreen Terrace, is what we're watching the show to avoid feeling. The floating timeline is not a production mechanism. It's a service the show provides. It's the show making the same promise every episode. The family is still there. They're still the same people. You haven't missed anything. Come back anytime and it will be exactly as you left it. This is a beautiful thing and a sad thing simultaneously. Beautiful because the promise is kept every episode year after year. The family is there, the couch gag plays, the opening sequence runs. Bart writes his detention sentence on the chalkboard and Homer is still Homer. The continuity holds. Sad because the promise requires the clock to stop, and stopping the clock, while it preserves the moment, also preserves the limits of the moment. The Simpsons can't grow up because growing up is the thing we come to the show to postpone. The show is the pause button. The show is the moment before everything changed, sustained indefinitely, frozen by the mutual agreement of the audience and the production. The Simpsons didn't build the loop. We did. We built it the first time we came back because we couldn't bear to let them go. And every time we come back again, every time we open the app and find the show waiting exactly where we left it, we hold the loop a little tighter. The loop holds because we hold it. And the characters are preserved inside it because we need them to be there. Consider what Springfield would look like if the loop broke. If Bart turned 40 and Lisa turned 38 and Maggie finally talked, and Homer retired from the plant, and Marge sat alone in the house on Evergreen Terrace on a Tuesday afternoon in October with the television off and the kids gone and the silence of an empty house pressing against the walls. That's not a Simpsons episode. That's something else. That's the thing the show has been keeping between itself and us. The actual ending of the story, the place where the floating timeline floats to if it ever lands. We watch the show so that it never lands. We are the reason Bart is still 10. Section 11. Hans Moleman, Ned Flanders, and the Hidden Tragedies of Springfield. Springfield has a background, not the history or the secrets, though it has those. The literal background, the space behind the foreground characters. The area of the frame that the camera doesn't follow, populated by people whose stories the show has never told and never will tell, lives being lived in the margins of the stories that do get told. Hans Moleman is the most visible background character and the most frequently dead. He appears in crowd scenes, in background shots, in the peripheral space of episodes, and then something terrible happens to him. He is struck by a vehicle. He falls from a height. He is eaten by an animal. He is set on fire. He is buried, electrocuted, crushed, drowned, incinerated, and consumed. He has died. By the fan community's painstaking count, well over 100 times across the show's canonical run. And he comes back. Every time. Always the same size, same glasses, same expression that exists somewhere between resignation and mild surprise. Ready to be destroyed again. The simplest explanation is that this is a running gag and shouldn't be analyzed further. But the running gag, when placed alongside the radiation theory and the coma theory and everything else we've been discussing, starts to look like something more specific than a joke. Under the radiation theory, Moleman represents the extreme end of what Springfield's contamination does to a human body. His apparent age, which is extreme, does not match his stated age, which he once gave as 31. Something has done to Hans Moleman what the plant's runoff does to the fish, aging him catastrophically beyond his biological years, transforming him into an elderly-appearing man before middle age, making his body something that death cannot permanently claim because the radiation has so thoroughly altered his cellular structure that normal biological endpoints no longer apply to him in the usual way. Under the coma theory, Molman serves a different function. He is the background process. He is the filler character in Homer's dream, the one Homer's unconscious doesn't maintain carefully enough to keep alive between scenes. He dies because the dreaming brain loses track of him, and he comes back because the dream needs him to populate the next scene. He is not a person in the dream. He is furniture that occasionally breaks and gets reassembled. Under the collective denial theory, Molman is simply what Springfield looks like when you focus on the parts it tries not to look at. He dies publicly, in crowds, in front of witnesses, and nobody calls for help. Nobody asks how he keeps coming back. The town has normalized his death cycle the way it has normalized everything else that should be alarming. A man dying in the town square is not a crisis in Springfield. It is background noise. It always has been. Molman once stated his age as 31 years old. Look at him. He appears to be in his 80s or 90s. If he's telling the truth, and there's no reason within the show to believe he's lying, then something aged him catastrophically. Something took a man in the prime of his life and compressed decades of aging into whatever time he's spent in Springfield, something that also made him nearly indestructible despite his apparent frailty. The radiation theory has an answer for this. The coma theory has an answer. The collective denial theory has an answer. The only theory that doesn't is the one that says The Simpsons is just a cartoon and none of it means anything. Ned Flanders is the opposite of background noise. He is the loudest presence in Springfield's moral landscape. The one character who consistently, sincerely, and sometimes exhaustingly tries to be good in a place where goodness has no structural support and receives no systematic reward. Ned is kind. He is genuinely kind, not performatively kind, not kind because it serves his interests, but kind as a baseline setting, the default mode from which he operates. He is generous with his time and resources. He is forgiving of people who have given him no particular reason to forgive them. He is patient with Homer's decades of hostility in a way that reads, on the surface, as saintliness. The saintliness has a darker history that the show revealed in a late-season episode and has never quite come to terms with. Ned's relentless positivity isn't a character trait. It's a therapeutic outcome. Ned was, as a child, violent and uncontrollable. A genuinely feral kid whose beatnik parents rejected discipline on principle and left him to manage his own rage without any framework. A psychiatrist was eventually brought in. The therapy worked. The rage was conditioned away. Ned's kindness was not grown. It was built, installed over years of behavioral modification. And what was installed was not the absence of anger, but the inability to express it. Under the floor of Ned's goodness is everything that was suppressed to produce that goodness. The rage that couldn't be beaten out of him in the normal sense and so was beaten into a locked room inside him. And the show has shown you what happens when that locked room opens. Ned's breakdown, triggered by the community's disastrous rebuilding of his house, reveals a person who has been accumulating unbearable experiences without a functional release valve for decades. What comes out is not just anger. It's the weight of every unanswered prayer, every forgiven insult, every act of generosity returned with indifference, every morning he got up and chose to be good again in a town that was not good back. His wife died because Homer was careless. Homer's selfishness literally killed Maud Flanders, and Ned forgave him. Not because it was easy, because his brain was wired to forgive and had no pathway to the alternative. The most theologically disturbing element of Ned's story is the God problem. The Simpsons is a show in which God exists. God has appeared on screen. God has spoken to Homer directly. God has given Homer theological guidance and personal attention on multiple occasions. Homer, who sleeps through church, who is ignorant of basic scriptural content, who treats his faith as a social obligation at best, has a direct line to the divine that Ned Flanders, who has devoted his entire life to his faith, who prays consistently and sincerely, who has organized his entire existence around his religious commitments, does not appear to have. God talks to Homer. God ignores Ned. The show has never explained this. The show has never even fully acknowledged it as a pattern, though the pattern is clear across multiple seasons and multiple episodes. The man who doesn't try gets the revelation. The man who tries gets silence. This is either a joke about the arbitrary nature of divine attention, or it's a statement about Springfield specifically. In Springfield's economy, genuine virtue doesn't produce proportional returns. The system doesn't reward what Ned is doing. The system rewards Homer, who is the plant's willing tool, who is broken in exactly the way the system needs him to be broken, who provides Burns's operation with the human shield it requires. Ned is not useful to the system in the way Homer is useful. So the system gives Homer divine revelation and gives Ned silence. The background tragedies of Springfield are not background. They are the foreground. The Simpsons family is the lens through which we see this town, but the town extends in every direction beyond them, full of Melmans who keep dying without being mourned, and Flanderses who keep trying without being rewarded, and Skinners who were expelled for telling the truth, and Grimeses who couldn't survive seeing clearly. Springfield is not a quirky backdrop for a family comedy. Springfield is a portrait of what communities look like when the systems that are supposed to protect people are oriented instead toward protecting the interests of the person at the top. The Melmans keep dying. The Flanderses keep forgiving. The good people keep being ground down. And Mr. Burns keeps going. Section 12. Everything connects the grand unified theory of Springfield. We've been in Springfield for a long time now. We started at the nuclear power plant, where the cooling towers have been emitting the same smoke into the same sky since 1989, where Homer Simpson has been failing at his job in a way that has never been accidental, where the water downstream carries the residue of 342 violations, and the fish have been growing extra eyes for decades. We established that the plant is not just the economic engine of the town, it is the mechanism of the town's management. The poison in the water is not a side effect, it is the product. We moved through a theory about whether any of this is a dream, whether a man in a hospital bed in Springfield General has been generating all of it since April 1993, holding his family in the only form he can bear to lose them, running the simulation forward forever because stopping it means confronting a real world that has moved on without him. We found that this theory explains things about the show that no other theory does. The aging freeze, the tonal shift, the celebrity parade, the resets, the impossibility of losing. We spent time with the most famous crime in the show's history and found that the official answer has enough holes in it to constitute not a resolution, but a closing. Someone shot Burns. The case was closed, not solved. 30 years later, the questions remain, and the show knows it, and nobody is fully satisfied by the infant with the lollipop explanation. We tried to find Springfield on a map and found it everywhere and nowhere, and understood that the everywhere and nowhere is not an accident. A town with no jurisdiction is a town with no accountability. The geographic ambiguity protects everything that happens inside it from the kind of external scrutiny that might actually produce consequences. We sat with Burns and tried to understand an existence that has been going for over a century and shows no signs of ending. We found a man who has built a system oriented entirely toward his own continuation, who powers himself with the same substance he uses to manage his neighbors, who is kept alive by a man whose father he killed, who is too expensive to die, because dying would mean accounting for everything his continued existence has cost. We watched an infant who has never spoken demonstrate across hundreds of episodes that she is the most capable person in the Simpson family and quite possibly in the whole town. We understood that her silence is not absence but strategy, that she has been watching and learning and waiting, that behind the pacifier and the wide eyes is an intelligence that has spent decades deciding what to do with what it knows. We cataloged the predictions and found that they are explained by volume and intelligence and extrapolation applied across decades, and that this explanation is almost adequate for most of them, and that the ones it doesn't quite cover are the ones that keep the fan community up at night. We traced Mona Simpson's life from housewife to radical to fugitive, to the mother Homer found and lost again, and understood that Burns's destruction of her family was not incidental to his project but central to it, that Homer was built to be the employee Burns needed by the systematic removal of everyone who might have helped Homer see himself differently. We watched a town vote to criminalize truth and understood that this episode, which fans have hated for nearly 30 years, is actually the most honest thing The Simpsons has ever said about itself. We asked whether time is broken in Springfield, whether the loop is structural rather than narrative, and found that the most honest answer is that the loop is both. It is structural because the production needs it. And it is also maintained by the audience's refusal to let the family age, to let them change, to let them become the people they would become if time were permitted to function normally inside this story. We looked at the people in the background and found tragedies that the foreground doesn't have time to examine. Hans Moleman dying and returning, Ned Flanders forgiving without a functional alternative. A man built to be good by a process that removed his capacity to be otherwise and placed him in a world that responds to goodness with indifference. Now here is what all of these threads are pointing to when you follow them to the same center. Springfield is a system, not in the vague hand-wavy sense of a corrupt place with corrupt institutions. A specific engineered, maintained system with a specific purpose and a specific beneficiary. The purpose is stasis. The beneficiary is Burns. The nuclear plant is the heart of this system, providing economic dependency and environmental management simultaneously. The water carries things that keep the population from thinking too clearly or organizing too effectively. The political institutions are captured at every level, from the mayor to the police chief to the medical establishment to the judiciary. The history has been sanitized. The founding myth is a fabrication. The geography is designed to be unlocatable. The legal apparatus has been demonstrated to produce results that serve the status quo, regardless of what the evidence actually shows. These are not separate mysteries. They are features of the same system. And the system has a beneficiary. And the beneficiary is very old and very wealthy, and glows in the woods behind the homes of the people he's been managing for decades, and employs an assistant whose father died in his plant and who has never been given a satisfying explanation for why his devotion to the man responsible for that death is the shape his life has taken. The grand unified theory of Springfield is that Springfield is a company town. An old-fashioned American company town, where the company owns the infrastructure and employs the workforce and controls the civic institutions and manages the environment and shapes the culture and rewrites the history when the history becomes inconvenient. The difference between Springfield and the historical company towns of American industrial history is that Springfield has been running continuously for more than a century, managed by someone who has not aged out of the picture, whose control has deepened rather than loosened over time, and whose project has become so embedded in the structure of the place that the place can no longer imagine itself without him. The residents of Springfield are not stupid. This is important to say clearly. Homer Simpson is not a stupid person in any simple sense. He is a person who is handed a set of cognitive limitations, some developmental, some environmental, some possibly arranged, and who has built a life within them that is genuinely full of love and humor and meaning. Bart is not a stupid child. He is a creative and resilient child, operating in a school system that was designed for obedience rather than education. Lisa is not deluded. Lisa sees exactly what Springfield is, and the weight of what she sees is the source of everything sad about her. The residents of Springfield have been managed. There's a difference, and somewhere in all of this, the coma theory has one more thing to say. Because if Homer has been dreaming since 1993, then the Springfield we've been analyzing, the corrupt town with the controlled population, and the ancient villain, and the impossible geography, and the silent genius baby, is a dream. It's Homer's dream. And Homer's unconscious mind built a town that reflects his fear. His fear that the world is being run by people who don't care about people like him. His fear that the structures of power are not there to protect him but to use him. His fear that his own limitations are not accidental. His fear that Marge will leave. And his hope. The hope that's in every episode, every warm kitchen scene, every drive in the family car, every time he holds Maggie and she holds his finger. His hope that despite everything, despite the plant and the water and Burns and the skeletons in the basement and the fish with 3 eyes, the family is real. The love is real. The house on Evergreen Terrace, with its broken fence and its 2 cars and its television in the living room where the family gathers, is real. Whether he's dreaming or not, whether the loop holds or not, whether Burns is still out there in the woods, glowing faintly, watching the lights in the windows go out one by one as Springfield goes to sleep. The show has been running for 36 years. It will probably keep running. And every season, every episode, every opening credits sequence with Homer and the glowing rod and the family on the couch asks the same question it has always asked. How much can a family contain? How much weight can love carry? How much can be broken in a place, and how much can still be held together by the people inside it who refuse to let go? Springfield is broken. Springfield has always been broken. The plant is broken, the water is broken, the government is broken, the history is broken, the timeline is broken, the geography is broken. But there is a house at 742 Evergreen Terrace, and the lights are on inside it, and the family is there. And whatever is happening in the basement of the plant, and whatever is in the water, and however old Burns is, and however long the loop has been running, that house is still there every episode, and the family is still in it. And Homer is still dreaming of them, if that's what this is. And Maggie is still watching with her wide and knowing eyes. And Marge is still there, and the show keeps going. Springfield keeps going. And maybe that's the most mysterious thing about it. Not that it's broken, but that something in it keeps trying, every episode, to hold. We spent 4 hours here tonight. We've turned over the rocks, followed the threads, asked the questions the characters can't ask because the characters are trapped inside the loop. And what we found under all of it, under every mystery and theory and contradiction, is the same thing the show has been showing us since the very first episode. A family trying, against the radiation and the manipulation and the broken institutions, and the water that glows and the fish that have 3 eyes and the billionaire who won't die, and the geography that doesn't hold and the history that was made, up and the timeline that refuses to move. Against all of it, every week, the Simpsons try. Homer tries to be a good father. He fails constantly and gloriously, and he tries again. Marge tries to hold the center. She absorbs things that would break most people, and she keeps the kitchen running and the lights on. Bart tries to matter in a world that keeps telling him to sit down. Lisa tries to be heard in a town designed not to listen. And Maggie, who sees everything and says nothing, tries in her own quiet way to keep her family alive. That's The Simpsons. Not the theories, not the mysteries, not the corruption and the management and the ancient billionaire in the woods. The family trying. And whatever Springfield is, whatever the plant has done to them, whatever the loop is doing to time, whatever Burns has been building in the dark for a century, the family keeps trying. The loop holds. Springfield endures. The cooling towers smoke. And on Evergreen Terrace, the lights are still on. End of script. 4 hours of Simpsons mysteries no one can solve. Let's spend more time inside the nuclear plant itself, because the physical geography of the facility is one of the most under-examined aspects of the radiation theory, and what it reveals about Burns's operation is more specific than the violation count suggests. The Springfield nuclear power plant is depicted, across the show's run, as having an unusual architecture. The publicly visible parts of the facility, the cooling towers, the intake structures, the control room where Homer works, occupy a relatively compact footprint. But the show has also depicted in various episodes a series of sub-levels and secondary corridors and supplementary facilities that don't appear on any official plant schematic. There's the basement with the skeletons. There's a lower level that Homer accidentally discovers in one episode, which contains equipment that doesn't resemble any standard nuclear plant component. There are tunnels that Homer traverses in other episodes that appear to connect the plant to locations outside its official perimeter. There are rooms that characters enter and exit without the show explaining what those rooms are for. The fan community's working hypothesis is that the plant has a shadow infrastructure. A second set of facilities operating beneath and alongside the official power generation operations, serving purposes that are not disclosed to regulators, not visible to inspectors, and not accessible to any employee below a certain level in Burns's organizational hierarchy. What is the shadow infrastructure for? The most conservative theory is that it houses the additional containment failures, the violations so severe that even Burns's standard concealment approach can't keep them from being detected if they're near the surface. The violations we know about, the 342 that the inspection found, are presumably the ones that couldn't be hidden. The shadow infrastructure houses the ones that could be hidden. A less conservative theory suggests the shadow infrastructure is where the medical research happens. The experimentation that produced the weekly treatment protocol that keeps Burns alive. The procedures that didn't work on the subjects who ended up in the basement. The ongoing work to refine and improve a longevity protocol that has been operational in some form for decades. The least conservative theory, and the one that the fan community finds most compelling precisely because it's the hardest to dismiss, is that the shadow infrastructure serves as the operational center of Burns's population management program. That somewhere in those sublevels, in rooms that Homer has stumbled into and immediately forgotten, there are the facilities that process and distribute the specific compounds that end up in Springfield's water supply. That the plant doesn't just generate power and leak radiation passively, it actively produces and introduces the specific biological and chemical agents that maintain the town's particular kind of manageable impairment. This theory requires Burns to be more deliberate and more technically sophisticated than the show usually depicts him. The show usually frames Burns's harm as the result of greed and indifference, rather than active malice. He doesn't care enough about the people of Springfield to fix the plant, but he's not specifically trying to poison them. He's just refusing to spend the money to not poison them. The shadow infrastructure theory inverts this framing. Burns isn't passively allowing harm. Burns is actively engineering a specific outcome. The plant is not just leaking. The plant is functioning exactly as Burns designed it to function, which is to say that the radiation and the chemicals and the water quality are not bugs but features calibrated to produce a population that is exactly impaired enough to serve Burns's needs, without being so impaired that the town can't function as an economic unit. The genius of the shadow infrastructure theory is that it resolves a specific tension in the standard radiation theory. The standard radiation theory sometimes struggles to explain how the impairment is so consistent across the population, so specifically calibrated, when radiation exposure from a leaky plant should produce more random and variable effects. Real-world radiation accidents produce chaotic, unpredictable outcomes, not the smooth, functional, subtly managed population that Springfield represents. If the impairment is deliberately engineered, if Burns has spent decades calibrating the exact mix of compounds in the water supply to produce the exact cognitive profile he needs in his workforce and his voter base, then the consistency makes sense. It's not natural. It's designed. Burns is not a negligent industrialist. He's a social engineer operating at a municipal scale, using his plant as the delivery system for a long-term behavioral modification program. The skeletons in the basement were early calibration failures. People who received doses that were too high, or compounds that were too potent, or treatment regimens that the body couldn't tolerate. They're in the basement because the basement is where Burns keeps the evidence of his failures, and because in Springfield nobody investigates what they're not supposed to investigate. This is Burns at his most monstrous, and also Burns at his most comprehensible. He's not doing this out of abstract evil. He's doing it because it works. It has always worked. It worked 30 years ago when Homer was a child drinking Springfield's water and developing the specific cognitive profile that would make him the perfect safety director. It works now. It will continue to work as long as the plant runs, and the compounds flow and the fish grow extra eyes in rivers that nobody tests. Springfield is not a town with an industrial pollution problem. Springfield is a laboratory with a population sample, and the experiment has been running, successfully, without a control group for the entirety of the show's run. Deeper dive. The nuclear plant and what it really runs. Let's spend more time inside the nuclear plant itself, because the physical geography of the facility is one of the most under-examined aspects of the radiation theory, and what it reveals about Burns's operation is more specific than the violation count suggests. The Springfield nuclear power plant is depicted, across the show's run, as having an unusual architecture. The publicly visible parts of the facility, the cooling towers, the intake structures, the control room where Homer works, occupy a relatively compact footprint. But the show has also depicted, in various episodes, a series of sublevels and secondary corridors and supplementary facilities that don't appear on any official plant schematic. There's the basement with the skeletons. There's a lower level that Homer accidentally discovers in one episode, which contains equipment that doesn't resemble any standard nuclear plant component. There are tunnels that Homer traverses in other episodes that appear to connect the plant to locations outside its official perimeter. There are rooms that characters enter and exit without the show explaining what those rooms are for. The fan community's working hypothesis is that the plant has a shadow infrastructure, a second set of facilities operating beneath and alongside the official power generation operations, serving purposes that are not disclosed to regulators, not visible to inspectors, and not accessible to any employee below a certain level in Burns's organizational hierarchy. What is the shadow infrastructure for? The most conservative theory is that it houses the additional containment failures, the violations so severe that even Burns's standard concealment approach can't keep them from being detected if they're near the surface. The violations we know about, the 342 that the inspection found, are presumably the ones that couldn't be hidden. The shadow infrastructure houses the ones that could be. A less conservative theory suggests the shadow infrastructure is where the medical research happens. The experimentation that produced the weekly treatment protocol that keeps Burns alive, the procedures that didn't work on the subjects who ended up in the basement, the ongoing work to refine and improve a longevity protocol that has been operational in some form for decades. The least conservative theory, and the one that the fan community finds most compelling precisely because it's the hardest to dismiss, is that the shadow infrastructure serves as the operational center of Burns's population management program. That somewhere in those sub-levels, in rooms that Homer has stumbled into and immediately forgotten, there are the facilities that process and distribute the specific compounds that end up in Springfield's water supply. That the plant doesn't just generate power and leak radiation passively, it actively produces and introduces the specific biological and chemical agents that maintain the town's particular kind of manageable impairment. This theory requires Burns to be more deliberate and more technically sophisticated than the show usually depicts him. The show usually frames Burns's harm as the result of greed and indifference rather than active malice. He doesn't care enough about the people of Springfield to fix the plant, but he's not specifically trying to poison them. He's just refusing to spend the money to not poison them. The shadow infrastructure theory inverts this framing. Burns isn't passively allowing harm. Burns is actively engineering a specific outcome. The plant is not just leaking. The plant is functioning exactly as Burns designed it to function, which is to say that the radiation and the chemicals and the water quality are not bugs but features, calibrated to produce a population that is exactly impaired enough to serve Burns's needs, without being so impaired that the town can't function as an economic unit. The genius of the shadow infrastructure theory is that it resolves a specific tension in the standard radiation theory. The standard radiation theory sometimes struggles to explain how the impairment is so consistent across the population, so specifically calibrated, when radiation exposure from a leaky plant should produce more random and variable effects. Real-world radiation accidents produce chaotic, unpredictable outcomes, not the smooth, functional, subtly managed population that Springfield represents. If the impairment is deliberately engineered, if Burns has spent decades calibrating the exact mix of compounds in the water supply to produce the exact cognitive profile he needs in his workforce and his voter base, then the consistency makes sense. It's not natural, it's designed. Burns is not a negligent industrialist. He's a social engineer operating at a municipal scale, using his plant as the delivery system for a long-term behavioral modification program. The skeletons in the basement were early calibration failures, people who received doses that were too high, or compounds that were too potent, or treatment regimens that the body couldn't tolerate. They're in the basement because the basement is where Burns keeps the evidence of his failures, and because in Springfield nobody investigates what they're not supposed to investigate. Springfield is not a town with an industrial pollution problem. Springfield is a laboratory with a population sample, and the experiment has been running, successfully, without a control group, for the entirety of the show's run. Deeper dive. The dream architecture and what it protects. There's a second layer to the coma theory that most people don't reach when they encounter it for the first time, and it concerns not just what Homer dreams, but what the dream is protecting him from. The coma theory, at its surface level, proposes that everything after April 1993 is a dream generated by Homer's damaged brain. The post-coma episodes are the dream's content. The pre-coma episodes are the real world. The vending machine accident is the boundary between reality and fiction. But the theory has an inversion that changes its entire emotional character. What if the dream isn't post-coma? What if the dream is the whole show? Consider this reading. Homer Simpson's life, objectively assessed, is catastrophic. He works in a nuclear plant owned by a man who destroyed his family. His cognitive impairment is the direct result of circumstances that benefited his employer. His mother was taken from him by the same employer. He has come close to losing his job, his home, his marriage, and his children dozens of times over 3 decades. He lives in a town that is slowly poisoning everyone in it, including him, including his children. His father is a confused old man in a retirement home. His neighbors treat him as a burden. His community regards him as a joke. This life, if you strip away the comedy, if you look at it with the cold eye of a social worker or a psychologist, is a life of sustained, systematic harm. Homer has been damaged by systems that benefit from his damage, managed by institutions that exist to serve his manager, and kept in a state of just sufficient function to maintain his usefulness. The dream, in this reading, is not Homer dreaming about his family after the coma. The dream is Homer's entire conscious experience of his life, constructed by a mind that cannot bear to process what's actually happening to it. Homer doesn't experience himself as a man who has been systematically damaged. He experiences himself as a lovable bumbler who keeps having adventures and coming home to his family. The comedy is the dream's defense mechanism. The pratfalls and the donuts and the strangling and the couch are the way the dream keeps Homer from noticing what his life actually is. The coma, in this reading, isn't where the dream starts. The coma is where the dream almost breaks. It's the moment when the pressure of reality becomes so acute, when the damage becomes so concentrated, that the dream's defensive structure nearly collapses. Homer comes close to waking up in 1993, and then the dream reasserts itself, repairs the breach, and Homer goes back to the couch and the donuts and the family. The tragedy of the coma theory, in this full version, is that the dream has always been running, not since April 1993, since the beginning. Since the morning Homer woke up to find his mother gone, or since the day the crayon found its way into his brain, or since Burns first identified him as the perfect candidate for the job. The dream is Homer's survival mechanism. It has been keeping him upright and functional inside an environment designed to break him for his entire life. He keeps waking up and going to work and loving his family and eating his donut because the dream is very good at what it does. It is so good that it has sustained itself for 36 years without breaking, without resolving, without ever arriving at the moment of clarity that would allow Homer to see his life as it actually is. And maybe that's a mercy. Maybe the dream, which gives him Marge and the kids and the house on Evergreen Terrace and 36 years of imperfect happiness, is better than the truth would be. Maybe Homer's mind built something beautiful inside the wreckage of what was done to him, and the beautiful thing is what we've been watching, and the beautiful thing is real, even if it's a defense mechanism, and the love is genuine even if it's also a dream. The coma theory doesn't have to be bleak. It can be read as the most hopeful thing about the show, that a mind which has been systematically damaged and deliberately limited can still build a world with love in it. That the warm kitchen and the family on the couch are not illusions in a pejorative sense. They are the truest things Homer's mind has ever produced, the best use he has ever made of whatever capacity remains to him after the plant and the water and the crayon have taken their share. Homer Simpson built heaven inside his own damage. Not a perfect heaven, not an untroubled heaven, but the kind of heaven that a man like Homer would build. Loud, funny, full of food, occasionally moving, and always bringing everyone home for dinner. That's the dream. That's the show. That's the best argument for watching it that exists. Deeper dive. Smithers and the Architecture of Devotion. Waylon Smithers Jr. is the most tragic character in The Simpsons, and the tragedy is so thoroughly embedded in the show's comedic framework that it's easy to miss entirely if you're not paying close attention. Let's lay out what we actually know about Smithers, beyond the jokes and the running gag of his devotion to Burns, because the facts of his situation are extraordinary. His father, Waylon Smithers Sr., died in an accident at the plant. The accident was a direct result of conditions at the plant that Burns was responsible for, that Burns could have prevented, and that Burns chose not to prevent because preventing them would have been expensive. Smithers Sr. died because of a decision his employer made about the acceptable cost of human life at his facility. Burns attended the funeral. Young Waylon was there. Burns had, in all likelihood, known the father. Burns would go on to know the son, to employ the son, to become the central organizing fact of the son's professional and personal life. Smithers Jr. grew up knowing who was responsible for his father's death. He grew up with that knowledge and then chose, as an adult, to work for the man responsible. He devoted his life, his career, his emotional capacity to the person who made him an orphan. He did this voluntarily. He has continued to do it for decades. He manages Burns's schedule, handles his correspondence, coordinates his medical treatments, protects him from consequences, and maintains a devotion so total and so absolute that it has consumed any other identity he might have developed. The show plays this as comedy, as the running joke of Smithers's unrequited feelings for his employer, as the punchline of a relationship dynamic that the audience has come to expect and finds reliably funny. But underneath the joke is something genuinely disturbing. Smithers has arranged his entire existence around the man who killed his father. He has become, in the most literal possible sense, the mechanism of his father's killer's survival. Smithers manages the medical treatments that keep Burns alive. Without Smithers, Burns dies. The son of Burns's victim is the only thing standing between Burns and the consequences of his own biology. How does this happen? The show doesn't fully explain it, and the fan community has been working on the question for years. One theory holds that Smithers genuinely doesn't know the full circumstances of his father's death. That the plant's version of the accident was presented to young Whalen in a way that obscured Burns's culpability, that attributed the death to accident or bad luck, rather than to Burns's deliberate choice not to fix the unsafe conditions. If Smithers was told a plausible story that didn't implicate Burns, and if Smithers has never had reason to investigate further, then his devotion to Burns might not be the paradox it appears to be. He might be devoted to a man he believes is not responsible. A second theory holds that Smithers knows perfectly well what happened to his father, and that his devotion to Burns is a form of negotiated survival. Burns is powerful. Burns knows what happened. Burns could, if he chose, make Smithers's life very difficult. The devotion is not love and not delusion. It's the arrangement a smart person makes when they understand they cannot win by fighting and cannot survive by walking away. Smithers stays close. He makes himself indispensable. He ensures that Burns needs him too much to be cavalier with him, and in the meantime, he waits. A third theory, the most uncomfortable one, holds that the devotion is real, that Smithers genuinely loves Burns, and that the love is not diminished or complicated by the knowledge of what Burns did to his father, because love is not a rational response to objective assessment of a person's worth. It is an attachment that forms in conditions that reason doesn't control. Young Whalen, growing up in the shadow of his father's absence, encountered Burns as a powerful figure, an authority, someone his father had worked for and clearly respected. The attachment formed, it deepened. It became the organizing principle of his adult life, and now he is trapped inside a devotion that he cannot escape and that he may not want to escape, because escaping it would mean confronting everything he has structured his identity around. This is the most human reading of Smithers, and the most heartbreaking. He's not a fool, and he's not a coward, and he's not a calculating survivor. He's a person who loved the wrong person in the wrong direction for the wrong reasons, and spent 36 years of his life in the service of that love, managing treatments and appointments and correspondence, and the thousand small necessities of Burns's continued existence. And whatever the love is or isn't, it has been real enough to give his days structure, and his life meaning, and his heart, in its specific broken way, something to beat for. The show has moved in the direction of giving Smithers more dignity in recent seasons, allowing him a life outside his devotion to Burns, allowing the relationship to become less total and less all-consuming. This is kind to the character, but it also slightly misses what made the original dynamic so strange and specific. The early Smithers, the one whose entire being was oriented toward Burns, was not a man with healthy relationship patterns who had made some poor choices. He was a man whose psychological architecture had been built, from childhood, around the absence his father's death created, and who had spent his adult life filling that absence with the closest thing available to him, which happened to be the man responsible for the absence. Springfield doesn't produce healthy people. It produces people shaped by what was done to them. Smithers is one of the most extreme examples of this because what was done to him was so specific and so early and so completely hidden in plain sight. Deeper dive. What Lisa knows and cannot do with it. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old for 36 years. She is, simultaneously, the most mature person in Springfield and its most thoroughly powerless. This is not an accident. The show did not make Lisa 8. Because 8 is a narratively convenient age. The show made Lisa 8 because 8 is specifically the age at which intelligence becomes visible enough to be threatening without being old enough to be actionable. An 8-year-old can see clearly. An 8-year-old cannot do anything about what she sees. Lisa sees everything. The corruption in Springfield's political institutions, the manipulation of the town's information environment, the connection between the plant and the water, and the cognitive state of the population, the fabricated history, the impossible geography, the systematic suppression of anyone who asks the wrong questions. She sees the full architecture of what Springfield is, and she has been seeing it since the first season, and she has been systematically unable to do anything about it because she is 8 years old and she lives in a town that will not listen to her. The frustration of Lisa Simpson is one of the show's most consistent emotional threads. Not the comedy of her frustration, though that's how the show usually frames it. The actual, sustained, grinding frustration of a mind that perceives clearly and cannot translate that perception into change. She builds cases, she gathers evidence, she makes arguments, she presents them to adults who respond with dismissal, with indifference, with active hostility. The show, at its most honest, depicts this not as comedy but as tragedy. The tragedy of intelligence in an environment that has been engineered to resist intelligence. The Jebediah Springfield episode is the most explicit expression of this. Lisa discovers the truth about the town's founder. She prepares to reveal it. She builds her case carefully. She is ready to present the evidence. And then she looks at the town, at the people who need the myth more than they need the truth, and she backs down. She chooses the lie. Not because she believes the lie, but because she understands at 8 years old that the truth has a cost she cannot afford to charge. That's not a child's decision. That's a decision made by someone who has already understood something that most adults never understand. That being right and being heard are two completely different achievements, and that pursuing the first without the second is a form of self-destruction. Lisa learned this at 8. She has been living with it for 36 years. Here is the specific cruelty of Lisa's position within Springfield's system. She is intelligent enough to diagnose the problem but young enough to be dismissed as a source of diagnosis. She is perceptive enough to see the corruption but powerless enough that her perception produces no institutional response. She is ethical enough to be unable to simply accept the conditions but embedded deeply enough in them that escaping is not a realistic option. Springfield needs Lisa, not to fix things but to demonstrate that the system works. The system works, in part, by having an intelligent internal critic who is systematically unable to produce change. Lisa's intelligence, her advocacy, her persistent moral clarity functions as a pressure valve for the system. It allows the system to contain critique without being threatened by it. As long as the smartest person in the room is also the youngest person in the room, the system is safe. Burns's plant doesn't just keep the population cognitively impaired, it keeps the impairment age stratified. The adults are managed, the children are dismissed. The combination means that the cognitive clarity that the radiation hasn't reached, which sometimes manifests in children who haven't been drinking the water long enough or whose brains are developing in ways that resist the impairment, is reliably filtered out of the decision-making processes by the simple fact of being underage. Lisa can see, Lisa cannot act, and by the time she is old enough to act, the water will have had its full effect. The floating timeline is the mechanism that ensures this never changes. If Lisa aged normally, she would eventually be old enough that her clarity could not be dismissed as childhood naivety. She would eventually have the standing and the resources to do something with what she knows. The floating timeline prevents this from ever happening. Lisa is always 8. She is always too young. She always has the diagnosis and never has the authority. The show has given us futures where Lisa grows up, the alternate timeline episodes, and in every one of them, the adult Lisa we meet is brilliant but compromised, clear-sighted but exhausted, someone who has spent the years between 8 and adulthood watching the town she grew up in maintain itself in exactly the configuration she identified as a child without being able to change it. She grew up. She got the authority. Nothing changed. Because the problem isn't that Lisa is too young. The problem is that the system was built to resist exactly the kind of intelligence Lisa represents, and it has been running long enough that it has worked out all the failure modes. It has an answer for an adult Lisa the same way it has an answer for an 8-year-old Lisa. Dismissal is just performed differently when the person being dismissed has a graduate degree. Lisa knows this. The adult Lisas in the alternate timeline episodes know this. They carry it in the specific posture of people who were right about everything and changed nothing, and who have had to build a life inside that knowledge. That's what Springfield does to its best people. It lets them see clearly and ensures that seeing clearly is not enough. Deeper dive. The Burns economy and where the money really goes. Burns's wealth has a public face and a private face, and the gap between them is where the most interesting theories about Springfield's financial architecture lie. The public face is simple. Burns owns a nuclear power plant. The plant generates electricity. The electricity is sold to Springfield residents and businesses. The revenue from those sales, combined with whatever investments Burns has made over a very long lifetime, constitutes his publicly visible fortune. The private face is more complicated. The Springfield nuclear power plant's official financial statements, to the extent that we can reconstruct them from what the show reveals, don't fully account for Burns's wealth. A single nuclear power plant serving a medium-sized town generates revenue, certainly, but not the kind of revenue that produces the lifestyle and the political influence that Burns maintains. He has homes that are palatial. He funds political campaigns. He employs a private security apparatus. He maintains the medical facility that keeps him alive, which, given the sophistication of the treatments involved, must be extraordinarily expensive. He has cultural artifacts and collectibles. He has resources that he deploys at will on projects that have nothing to do with power generation. Where does this money come from? The most conservative theory involves investments. A man who has been accumulating wealth since the early 20th century, who has not had to spend it on things like retirement or college tuition, who has compounded it across a very long lifetime, would accumulate significant capital through ordinary investment returns. Burns has had 100 years to let money make money. The math, at reasonable historical rates of return, produces large numbers. But the fan community has developed a more specific theory about Burns's revenue streams that accounts for the full scale of his wealth in ways that investment returns alone struggle to explain. The shadow infrastructure theory, which we discussed earlier, has an economic dimension. If the plant's sublevels contain facilities producing things with commercial value, medical compounds, research data, biological materials derived from the unusual organisms the plant's radiation produces, then there is a revenue stream from those operations that doesn't appear on any public financial disclosure. Burns has always been the kind of operator who understands that the most profitable activities are the ones that have no regulatory framework, and the most effective way to ensure an activity has no regulatory framework is to ensure that nobody outside a very small circle of trust knows the activity exists. The biological weapons facility that Mona Simpson destroyed in 1969 is relevant here. Burns was running an active biological weapons research program in Springfield. This wasn't a sideline. This was a facility with sufficient resources and capability to produce weapons-grade biological materials. That kind of operation doesn't emerge from nowhere. It requires expertise, infrastructure, supply chains, and funding that you don't accidentally accumulate. Where did Burns acquire the expertise to run a biological weapons program? Where did he acquire the funding? The show doesn't explain this, but the implication is that Burns's involvement in biological weapons research predates 1969 by a significant margin. The facility Mona destroyed was not the beginning of his interest in this area. It was a mature facility representing decades of prior work. And after Mona destroyed the facility, Burns didn't exit the field. He rebuilt, he redirected, he found new applications for the knowledge and infrastructure he had developed. The medical treatments that keep him alive are, at their core, advanced biological engineering applied to the problem of human longevity. The same expertise that built the biological weapons program was redirected toward personal survival. Burns is, in this reading, a century-old biotech entrepreneur operating outside any regulatory framework because he was operating before the regulatory frameworks existed and has arranged things to ensure they still don't quite apply to him. His wealth comes from a century of unregulated biological research, from the sale of knowledge and materials and procedures to parties who value them for reasons that Burns doesn't ask about too closely From the network of relationships he has built across a lifetime with people who need things that cannot be obtained through legitimate channels. This is where the money is, not in the nuclear plant, which is a cover and a means of population management and a source of raw materials for his real operation. In the century of off-the-books research that the plant enables and conceals. The Springfield monorail episode, which seems like pure comedy, has a detail that becomes interesting under this theory. The monorail salesman is able to extract an enormous sum of money from Springfield's municipal budget with relatively little effort. The ease with which money flows out of Springfield's public coffers suggests a municipal budget that is maintained at an artificially high level for the purpose of being available to extract. Burns's plant generates tax revenue. The tax revenue fills municipal accounts. Those accounts are accessible to anyone who can construct a plausible proposal to extract from them. Springfield's municipal treasury functions, in this reading, as a secondary revenue stream for Burns. Not directly, not in any way that would be obvious to an auditor, but through the steady flow of municipal contracts, infrastructure projects, consulting arrangements, and one-time expenditures that move money from the public accounts into the private accounts of people and entities that have relationships with Burns. The monorail is one example. There are dozens more. The money flows. It flows in predictable directions. And the person at the end of those flows, always, is the person who owns the machine that generates the money in the first place. Burns doesn't just own Springfield's power company, he owns Springfield's economy. The plant is the pump. Everything else is the system of pipes through which the value flows ultimately back to him. Deeper dive. The predictions and the show's relationship with itself. The Simpsons has predicted its own relationship to prediction. This sounds recursive, and it is, but following the recursion reveals something genuine about the show's self-awareness. In the early seasons, the show made meta-jokes about television, and about itself as a television show. These jokes acknowledged the constructed nature of what the audience was watching. They winked at the audience about the artificiality of the format. They were clever, self-aware moments that audiences responded to because they felt honest, because they stripped away the pretense that what the viewer was watching was anything other than a show made by people making a show. What those early meta moments couldn't fully anticipate was what the show would become. They were meta about the show in its present tense, about the show as it existed in the early 1990s. They were not meta about the show as a cultural institution that would persist for 4 decades and accumulate a reputation for prediction that would eventually become one of its defining characteristics. But here's the strange thing. The show eventually became meta about that too. As the predictions narrative built in the cultural consciousness, as The Simpsons predicted X memes spread and grew, the show began to incorporate its own reputation for prediction into its content. It made episodes about the predictions, it made jokes about the jokes, it became self-aware about its own self-awareness. And then those self-aware moments became part of the prediction record. An episode that jokes about the show's predictive reputation arrives in the archive alongside episodes that generated that reputation, and the joke becomes the record, and the record becomes material for future analysis, and the fan community ends up analyzing episodes about the predictions alongside the predicting episodes themselves, in a loop that the show helped create by acknowledging the loop. The Springfield Files is the most interesting example of this. The episode is explicitly meta. It invites comparison to the X-Files. It features the real voices of the actors who play Mulder and Scully. It knows it's a parody. It does its parody with affection and care. And then it ends with the reveal that Burns is the alien, which takes the parody and turns it into something else. Something that is using the parody framework to deliver a genuine piece of Springfield mythology. The alien is Burns. The mystery has an answer. The answer changes how you think about everything. The show did this repeatedly. The meta jokes and the parody episodes and the celebrity cameos and the fourth wall acknowledgments are the cover story for the actual storytelling, which continues underneath them, in the content and the mythology and the slowly accumulating picture of what Springfield is and who Burns is and what has been done to the people inside the dome. The predictions work the same way. The prediction discourse is the cover story, the thing underneath it. The actual mechanics of how a group of very smart people extrapolate cultural trends over a very long time horizon is less discussed and more interesting. The show doesn't predict. The show extrapolates. But the extrapolation, applied consistently over 4 decades, produces a body of work that contains the future inside it, distributed through the archive, waiting to be recognized when the future arrives, and puts on the clothes the show already laid out for it. This is a specific creative achievement. It requires not just intelligence, but patience. The predictions only look like predictions from a temporal distance. At the moment of creation, they were observations. They were the show saying, this is the direction things are moving. This is what the trajectory looks like. This is where the line goes if you extend it. The line extended, the predictions arrived. And the show that made them was still running, still extending new lines, still watching the future come to meet its extrapolations with the patient attention of a creative institution that has been in the business of looking forward for long enough that looking forward has become its primary mode of seeing. The Simpsons doesn't predict, it observes. The observation persists. The world catches up. And everyone calls it a prediction because that's the more interesting frame. And the show, which has always understood that more interesting frames are more interesting than accurate ones, doesn't bother to correct the record. Deeper dive. The Tamsarian Principle and how Springfield manages truth. The Principle and the Pauper is the most important episode of The Simpsons, not because it resolves anything, but because it crystallizes, in the most explicit form the show has ever managed, the mechanism by which Springfield processes inconvenient truth. We've discussed this episode's surface content already. Armin Tamsarian, the real Seymour Skinner, the judicial order, the man on the train. But let's push deeper, because the episode has implications that extend far beyond the specific case of Springfield's principle. The operative question is this: what made the town's response possible? It wasn't just collective preference for the comfortable fiction, it was the existence of a legal instrument. Springfield didn't just informally agree to pretend Tamsarian was Skinner. They got a judge to sign an order. They used the formal apparatus of the legal system to enforce a factual falsity. The legal system produced a document that declared fiction to be reality and criminalized the statement of what was actually true. This requires a captured judiciary. A judge who was willing to sign that order is a judge who understands, at some level, that their function in Springfield is not to serve justice but to serve the town's preference for comfortable fictions. The Principle and the Pauper reveals, as clearly as anything in the show's history, that Springfield's courts are not a separate institution from Springfield's power structure. They are an extension of it, which means every other judicial outcome in Springfield, every verdict, every sentence, every order, every ruling, needs to be evaluated with this episode in mind. The court that ruled Tamsarian is legally Skinner is the same court that would adjudicate any challenge to Burns's operations. It's the same court that would hear a lawsuit from a resident who wanted to hold Burns accountable for the plant's violations. It's the same court that would rule on whether the EPA's dome was a legitimate exercise of federal authority. That court signed an order declaring reality illegal. The Tamsarian precedent means that in Springfield's legal system, the determination of what is true is not separate from the determination of what is convenient. Truth is what the court says it is. The court says what the town's power structure needs it to say, and the town's power structure, at the highest level, is Burns. There is also the mechanism of the decree itself. The order doesn't just declare Tamsarian to be Skinner. It makes speaking the truth punishable. It transforms truth-telling from a protected activity into a criminal one. And this is enforced within the episode and apparently in subsequent episodes without opposition, without challenge, without any character raising the constitutional concerns that such an order would obviously raise in any functioning legal system. The fan community has noted that this episode, viewed as a legal document rather than a comedy, describes a town in which the Bill of Rights does not appear to apply. Speech is criminalized. Due process is suspended. Identity is assigned by judicial decree without reference to fact. A man who committed no crime is physically expelled from the community by court order. Springfield is not just a poorly governed town. Springfield is, by the legal standards established in this episode, a jurisdiction in which the basic protections of democratic governance have been suspended and replaced with a system that produces whatever outcomes are desired by whoever holds the power to shape what the court desires. And this episode aired in 1997 on a Sunday night on primetime television. and the audience mostly responded by being annoyed that Skinner's backstory had been changed. The machine absorbs everything. Deeper dive. The weight of 36 years. There's a quality to watching very old television that doesn't exist with newer content, and it changes what you see when you watch it. When you watch a new show, you're watching a show that exists in the same temporal moment you do. It references things you know. It assumes a cultural context you inhabit. The gap between you and the show is zero. When you watch The Simpsons, especially the early seasons, you're watching something that was made before many of its current viewers were born. The references are historical. The cultural context is archived. The show is a document from the past as much as it's entertainment for the present. And this creates a specific experience that the show's continued production makes stranger and stranger. Because The Simpsons is both historical document and current entertainment simultaneously. The early seasons are 36 years old. The current season is this year. They are the same show. The same characters, the same house, the same yellow skin and 4 fingers and nuclear plant on the horizon. The Bart Simpson who wrote on the chalkboard in 1989 and the Bart Simpson who writes on the chalkboard today are the same age. They are visually indistinguishable. They live in the same house and go to the same school and have the same family. The 36 years between their appearances exist only for the audience. Inside the show, no time has passed. This creates a kind of vertigo when you sit with it. You are watching a show that has been running your entire life, and the characters in it have not aged a day, and the town they live in has not changed, and the problems they face are the same problems they faced before you were born. The show is not aging with you. You are aging around the show. The show is staying still while the world moves, and you are moving with the world, and every time you look back at Springfield, it is exactly where it was when you left it. This is the floating timeline's emotional core, the thing it actually does to the audience beyond serving the narrative needs of an animated comedy. It gives you a fixed point. In a world that changes continuously, sometimes faster than can be processed, sometimes in ways that are frightening or destabilizing or simply too much, the show is always there, always the same, always the family on the couch ready to do the next thing. The fixed point is not comfortable. Exactly. It's poignant. There's a specific feeling that comes with watching an old Simpsons episode and recognizing that the world it was made for no longer exists, that the cultural references have become historical artifacts, that the technology on screen is antique, that the political moment it was commenting on has resolved itself one way or another. And the characters don't know any of this. They're still in it. They're still living inside that moment. And you're watching from outside, from decades later, carrying everything that has happened in the time between then and now. You know things the characters don't know. You know what came after. You know how some of the things the show worried about resolved. You know which satirical targets the show aimed at and whether they turned out to be as dangerous as the show feared, or less dangerous, or more. You carry 36 years of subsequent history into every viewing, and the characters can't receive it, and the show can't incorporate it, and the gap between what you know and what they know is the gap between the present and all the presents that were futures when those episodes were made. This is what it means to watch a show that has been running for 36 years. You are watching preserved time. You are watching a series of frozen present moments, all claiming to be now, stacked up across 4 decades, and each one is a record of what it felt like to be alive in a specific cultural moment that the show processed and reflected back at the audience that was alive in it. The fan community's obsession with Springfield's mysteries is, in part, an expression of this experience. The theories and the analyses and the elaborate connective tissue that fans have built between episodes and across seasons are ways of engaging with all of that preserved time at once. They're ways of treating the show not as a series of individual comedy episodes, but as a document, as evidence, as a record of something that spans decades and accumulates meaning across that span in ways that no individual episode could anticipate. The grand unified theory of Springfield is the fan community's attempt to find the meaning that the accumulated weight of 36 years has produced. Not the meaning of any individual episode, but the meaning of all of them together, of the pattern they make when you step far enough back to see the whole thing at once. And the pattern when you step back that far looks like this. A family, imperfect and loving, and struggling against systems designed to keep them struggling. Surviving episode after episode, season after season, year after year, for reasons that have more to do with love than with any rational calculation. A town that should not exist, that cannot quite be located, that exists in a permanent present, sustained by the radioactive output of a facility that is slowly damaging everything inside it. A billionaire who will not die, a baby who will not speak, a man who may be dreaming. And under all of it, in every frame, in every joke, in every reset and every couch gag and every opening credit sequence, the same question. How much can hold? How much can survive? How much love is enough to keep something intact against everything that is trying to break it? 36 years in, the question is still open. The family is still there. The lights are still on. Deeper dive. The economics of Springfield's incompetence. Springfield's municipal government is a masterpiece of engineered dysfunction. Every institution in the town performs a function, but none of them perform that function well, and the consistency of the failure across institutions and across decades is the kind of consistency that doesn't happen by accident. Start with Mayor Quimby. The show establishes quickly that Quimby is corrupt, that he uses his office for personal enrichment, that his policy decisions are guided by bribery and self-interest rather than the public good, and that this is known widely by essentially the entire population of Springfield. The town knows its mayor is corrupt. The town keeps electing him anyway. The standard interpretation is that this reflects voter apathy and the difficulty of changing entrenched political machines. This is probably part of it. But there's a more specific theory about the Quimby situation that emerges from the larger picture of Springfield's management structure. Burns needs the mayor's office captured. He needs it reliably, predictably, permanently captured, not just occasionally sympathetic to his interests. Quimby provides this. Quimby's corruption is not random. It follows a pattern. The pattern serves Burns. The contracts that Quimby awards, the regulations he doesn't enforce, the investigations he doesn't pursue, the inspections he doesn't authorize, all of them maintain the conditions the plant requires. Quimby doesn't just happen to be corrupt in ways that benefit Burns. He is corrupt in ways specifically calibrated to benefit Burns, because Burns has been the primary source of Quimby's corruption income for decades. The mechanism by which Burns ensures Quimby's continued service is the same mechanism that runs through the entire political economy of Springfield: information control. Burns knows things. He knows where the money went and who took it, and what favors were exchanged, and what photographs exist, and what recordings have been made. Burns has been accumulating this kind of information since long before anyone currently in Springfield's political class was old enough to vote. He has files. The files are detailed. The files cover everyone who has ever held power in Springfield, and most of the people who will hold power in the future. This is the actual source of Burns's political power. Not campaign contributions, though those exist. Not direct bribery, though that exists too. The foundation is information. Burns knows where the bodies are buried, literally in his own case, and his political relationships are maintained by the implicit understanding that this information can be deployed against anyone who stops serving his interests. Quimby serves because Quimby has no safe alternative to serving. Chief Wiggum serves because Wiggum has no safe alternative to serving. The circuit court judge who signed the Tamzarian order served because that judge had no safe alternative to serving. The inspectors who conduct Springfield's periodic plant inspections and consistently fail to produce the kind of report that would force remediation serve because they have no safe alternative to serving. The town is not incompetent. The town is precisely competent at exactly the wrong things, maintaining the conditions that benefit Burns while performing the appearance of governance. This is what makes the Homer as strategy theory its most compelling when viewed against this backdrop. Homer is not just the perfect safety director because he's impaired. Homer is the perfect safety director because he's the right kind of impaired. He's not a person who understands the corruption and participates in it for personal gain. He's a person who genuinely doesn't understand what's happening. This is actually safer for Burns than a corrupt Homer would be. A corrupt Homer could be leveraged. A corrupt Homer's cooperation could be purchased, which means it could also be purchased away from Burns. An impaired Homer cannot be flipped because there's nothing to flip. There's no calculation happening that could produce a different outcome. Homer is not choosing to ignore the violations. Homer genuinely cannot see them as violations. The genius of the system is that its most important component is not under rational control. Homer cannot be bribed away from Burns because Homer doesn't know he's working for Burns in any meaningful sense. He knows Burns signs his paycheck. He doesn't know Burns manages every aspect of his life. He doesn't know Burns took his mother. He doesn't know Burns put a crayon in his brain. He doesn't know the water he's been drinking for 30 years is doing things to him. An employee who doesn't know the system exists cannot betray the system. Burns has ensured that his most essential employee is also his most unknowing one. The man who runs the plant safety program is the most thoroughly managed person in Springfield, managed so completely and from so early in his life that the management is invisible to him. This is the masterwork. This is what decades of careful social engineering produces. Not a corrupted Homer who can be identified and removed. An impaired Homer who doesn't know he's impaired, who shows up every day because he loves his family and needs his job, who sleeps at his workstation not because he's been paid to sleep, but because his brain genuinely cannot sustain vigilance in that environment, who is too honest to be a threat and too damaged to be effective. The system doesn't need Homer to do anything. It just needs Homer to not do the specific things that would make the system visible. And Homer, every day, perfectly, performs the absence of those things. 342 violations, 36 years, 1 safety director, 0 reports. The system works. Deeper dive. What the dome means. The Simpsons movie is the only moment in the show's history when Springfield's internal logic was forced to confront an external reality that it could not manage through its usual mechanisms. The EPA dome is not a consequence of Burns's decisions. It is a consequence of the accumulated consequences of Burns's decisions, pushed to a point where even Springfield's mechanisms of denial and management and regulatory capture could not absorb them. The contamination was so severe, the evidence so visible, the public health crisis so acute, that a federal agency bypassed the usual channels and imposed a physical solution that couldn't be voted away or legally dismissed. A glass dome went over the entire town. The Simpsons movie is usually discussed as a theatrical expansion of the show's premise, a feature-length Simpsons adventure with a bigger-stakes version of a Springfield catastrophe. But the dome is more than a big-stakes version of a familiar episode problem. The dome is the show's acknowledgement that there is an endpoint to how much a town can absorb before the outside world responds. Springfield has been managing its contamination problem through the usual combination of legal ambiguity, captured institutions, economic dependency, and the population's general inability to connect the dots. These mechanisms are effective against gradual, incremental environmental harm. They are less effective against a sudden public emergency that produces obvious, visually compelling evidence of the accumulated damage. The dome is the moment when Burns's system of incremental management failed to keep the consequences quiet enough. When the frog jumps out of the slowly warming water. When the outside world, which has been observing Springfield from a distance and not quite believing what it was seeing, finally moves in with instruments of enforcement. And here is what the dome actually reveals about Burns's system. The system is not infinitely sustainable. It works within a range. It works when the contamination is below the threshold of undeniable external visibility. It works when the damage is distributed across time in ways that make it look like ordinary industrial imperfection rather than catastrophic failure. It works when the political capture holds and the regulatory capture holds, and the geographic ambiguity holds. The dome is what happens when all of those holds fail simultaneously. It is the catastrophic convergence of 3 decades of accumulated, managed, distributed harm into a single, visible crisis that cannot be managed or distributed or attributed to ordinary imperfection. And the show's response to the dome is instructive. After the dome comes down, after Springfield is evacuated and then unevacuated, after the crisis is resolved, the show continues. The next season of The Simpsons began as though the dome had not happened, as though 3 decades of catastrophic environmental mismanagement had not been officially acknowledged by the United States government, as though the EPA had not determined that the entire town needed to be sealed from the outside world. Springfield absorbed the dome. The reset mechanism absorbed the dome, and the cooling towers kept smoking. This tells you something important about the system's resilience. Even the catastrophic failure that required federal containment was not enough to permanently disrupt the system. The system has redundancies built into its redundancies. Even if the external reality breaks through, even if the dome comes down, the mechanisms of management and denial and forgetting will reassert themselves in time. Burns presumably survived the dome. He has survived everything. He will continue to survive, one treatment at a time, while the town beneath his facility continues to absorb whatever the facility continues to produce. The dome was a warning. Springfield absorbed the warning. The loop continues. Deeper dive. Homer's love as the show's only resolution. There is no resolution to Springfield's mysteries. The fan community knows this. The show knows this. The theories will never be confirmed. The geography will never be located. Burns will never be held accountable. Homer will never know what was done to him. Lisa will never be heard. Maggie will never speak in a context that produces change. The show knows all of this. It has always known it. The mysteries are structural. They exist to be asked about, not answered. The corruption is permanent. The loop is permanent. The floating timeline is permanent. And yet the show keeps producing episodes, 36 years of them, and the audience keeps watching. And something in this sustained engagement resists the conclusion that it's all just sound and fury, that the mysteries and the corruption and the impairment and the skeletons in the basement add up to nothing. What resists that conclusion is the one thing in the show that neither the radiation, nor the crayon, nor the 36 years of managed impairment, nor Burns's century-long operation has been able to touch. Homer loves his family. He loves them in a way that is unconditional and complete, and not subject to revision. He loves Marge in a way that has survived every failure, every disaster, every catastrophe that the show has put them through. He loves his children in a way that has survived his inadequacy as a parent, his cognitive limitations, his inability to give them most of what they need. The love persists. It is, in the full context of everything Springfield has done to Homer Simpson, a genuinely astonishing fact. Burns took his mother. Burns impaired his cognition. Burns poisoned his water and his body and the bodies of his children. Burns has managed every aspect of Homer's life, from the job to the paycheck to the water coming out of the tap, in service of Burns's own interest and at Homer's expense. And Homer still loves. He still walks through the door at the end of the workday and falls on the couch and eats too much and makes bad jokes and gets strangled by Bart and endures Lisa's moral improvement campaigns and holds Maggie and puts his arm around Marge's shoulders in the kitchen. The love survived. This is the one thing the system couldn't engineer. Burns could engineer Homer's impairment, but he couldn't engineer the absence of love. The love was there before Burns designed Homer's conditions. It was there in Homer's childhood, in whatever remained of his family after Mona left, in the specific attachment to people that Homer's damaged mind somehow maintained intact while losing other cognitive capacities. And this love, which the system couldn't touch, is the thing the show has been about all along. Not Burns, not the violations, not the mysteries, not even the theories, fascinating as they are. The show is about what survives, what persists inside a system designed to break it. What a family can hold on to when everything around them is designed to make holding on impossible. And the answer, 36 years running, is each other. They hold on to each other. Imperfectly, loudly, with too much strangling and too many donuts, and not enough listening and constant, sustained, indestructible love. That's the show. That's the mystery that doesn't need solving. That's what we come back for. Deeper dive. The side characters and what they mirror back. Springfield's recurring secondary characters are not comedic accessories to the Simpson family story. They are a gallery of what the town produces. Each one, examined carefully, is a portrait of what happens to a different kind of person when they spend decades inside a system designed to prevent growth, accountability, and change. Mo Sislak runs a bar that should not be in business. His establishment is a fire hazard, a health code violation, and a haven for behavior that any functioning liquor licensing board would have shut down long ago. The Simpsons has depicted Moe's Tavern accumulating violations and citations and near-miss disasters over 36 years without the bar ever being permanently closed. The bar persists. Moe persists. And Moe, in the moments when the show steps back from his comic surface and shows you what's underneath, is one of the most comprehensively miserable people in Springfield. The misery is specific. Moe has ambitions. He wanted to be a competitive boxer. He had creative ambitions. culinary ambitions, romantic ambitions, ambitions toward a different kind of life than the one he occupies. The show depicts these ambitions in episodes that take them seriously, that show Mo pursuing something with genuine desire, and then show the pursuit failing, and then show Mo back behind his bar, serving the same regulars, in the same dim light, in the same life that was there before the ambition briefly interrupted it. Springfield does this to Mo, systematically. Every attempt he makes to become something other than what he is gets absorbed by the same mechanism that absorbs everything else. The culinary success is temporary. The romantic relationship doesn't survive. The boxing career is historical, not present. Springfield needs Mo behind the bar. The bar is part of the town's social infrastructure. Mo staying exactly where he is serves the town's need for stable, familiar characters, the same way Homer staying exactly where he is serves Burns's need for a compliant safety director. There are characters for whom Springfield is an active project of destruction, like Homer, and characters for whom it is a passive project of containment, like Mo. Homer is managed. Mo is just held. The town doesn't need to break Mo. It just needs him to stay. And Mo, lacking the specific cognitive damage that keeps Homer in place, stays for his own reasons, the reasons that keep people in bars they've tended for decades in towns they've never left. Inertia, attachment, the weight of accumulated familiarity that makes change feel more dangerous than staying. Barney Gumble is the cautionary tale. The show established early, in a flashback to Homer's college years, that Barney was once a promising student, academically gifted, with potential that seemed genuinely bright. Homer introduced him to beer. One drink. The show frames this as a joke, Homer's casual influence as the origin of Barney's alcoholism. But the fan community has always found this backstory more disturbing than funny. Barney before Homer's beer was a different kind of person. He was the version of himself that could have existed if the circumstances had been different. And then one drink, one night, one introduction to the thing that would consume him, and Barney became the Barney who sits at Moe's bar, who becomes a punchline, whose life narrows to the dimensions of a bar stool in a dim room in a town that is slowly poisoning everyone in it. The show has given Barney sobriety, more than once. Barney gets sober, briefly experiences the possibility of his full self, and then the sobriety ends and he's back. The show cannot let Barney stay sober any more than it can let Homer leave the plant. The sober Barney threatens the Springfield equilibrium the same way any fundamental change to any element of the town's social architecture threatens the equilibrium. Springfield needs its drunk. It needs its bar. The drunk and the bar are load-bearing. Remove either and the town's social infrastructure becomes something different, something less familiar, something that would require the audience and the show's characters alike to reckon with what the town actually is, rather than what it performs itself to be. The town keeps its drunk. The drunk keeps his bar stool. The bar stays dim. The light outside the window stays the same. The loop holds. Sideshow Bob is Springfield's most explicit rejection of the theory that intelligence and articulation can change anything inside the town's system. Bob is, by almost any measure, the most gifted person to have regularly appeared in Springfield. He is educated at a level that exceeds any other character. He is musically accomplished. He is articulate in multiple registers, equally comfortable with formal rhetoric and casual conversation. He understands literature and art and philosophy and politics. He is, in short, precisely the kind of person who, in a functional society, would have the standing to be heard when he identifies a problem and proposes a solution. Springfield's problem, from Sideshow Bob's perspective, is Bart Simpson, which is not entirely wrong. Bart's prank exposed Bob and set in motion the chain of events that destroyed his career and his freedom. Bob's grievance is real. His targeting of Bart is not random malice. It is, by the logic of his own experience, a rational response to a specific wrong. But the show is not interested in vindicating Bob's grievance. The show is interested in what Springfield does with someone who is too intelligent and too determined to be absorbed. The answer is recidivism. Bob keeps trying to kill Bart. He keeps failing. He keeps going back to prison. The cycle repeats so many times that it becomes its own loop within the larger Springfield loop, a self-contained system of failure that is as immune to change as the town itself. Bob's intelligence doesn't save him. It makes him more effective at pursuing the wrong thing in the wrong way with the wrong emotional foundation. He is smart enough to plan elaborate operations and not wise enough to understand that the elaborateness of the operation is not what's failing. What's failing is the fundamental orientation. He has directed his considerable gifts at a target that Springfield protects, and Springfield will always protect Bart Simpson because Bart Simpson is one of the load-bearing elements of what Springfield is. Bob escapes. Bob is recaptured. Bob plans. Bob fails. Bob goes back to prison. The show has run this cycle for 3 decades, and the fan community has noted, sometimes with admiration and sometimes with exasperation, that Sideshow Bob is the only character in Springfield who keeps trying to fundamentally alter the town's conditions and who pays a specific, consistent price for that attempt. He is in prison or in exile every time we see him. He is the man who keeps reaching for change in a town that has criminalized change, and the town keeps responding to his reach with the full weight of its institutions. The loop holds. Bob goes back inside. Springfield continues. Deeper dive. The final mystery. Who keeps the loop running? After everything we've traced, after all the theories and all the evidence and all the mechanisms and all the specific ways Springfield has been engineered to maintain itself, one question remains that none of the individual theories fully answers. Who keeps it running? The answer can't be Burns alone. Burns is powerful. Burns is very old and very calculating and very well-resourced. But Burns is also, as we established earlier, dependent on a weekly medical treatment that keeps him alive 1 week at a time. Burns cannot micromanage everything. The Springfield operation is too large, too complex, too multi-institutional to be maintained by one person's active attention. There must be a mechanism that runs without Burns needing to actively manage every element. A self-maintaining system. A system that produces the conditions required for its own continuity without requiring a central controller to constantly monitor and adjust. The radiation theory provides part of the answer. If the population is maintained in a state of managed impairment, the population itself becomes a mechanism of continuity. They elect Quimby because they have always elected Quimby. They reappoint Homer because Homer has always been in that chair. They absorb the dome and forget the dome because they have always absorbed and forgotten. The management becomes self-sustaining because the managed become agents of their own management. The cultural memory theory provides another part of the answer. Springfield's history has been sanitized. The founding myth is false. The historical record contains the fabrications rather than the facts. A population without honest access to its own history cannot use that history as a resource for change. Every generation in Springfield inherits a version of the town's past that has been curated to exclude the evidence of what has been done to it. The sanitization is self-propagating because the sanitized version is what the schools teach and what the community celebrates and what the official records contain. The economic dependency provides the structural answer. The plant is the economic foundation. Remove the plant and the economy collapses. Threaten the plant and you threaten the livelihoods of the people who depend on the plant. The people who depend on the plant will protect the plant, because protecting the plant is protecting themselves, and this is true even for people who suspect or know that the plant is harming them. Rational self-interest produces complicity, and complicity is self-maintaining. But even all of this doesn't fully account for what The Simpsons has actually been, as a cultural object, over 36 years. Because the loop isn't just running inside Springfield, it's running outside Springfield too. It's running in the minds of the 30 years of viewers who have watched the show and loved the characters and kept coming back. We are part of the maintenance system. Our viewership is what funds the production. Our engagement is what justifies the continued investment. Our love for the family is what ensures that the show keeps making the family available to be loved. The loop runs because we run it, because we come back each week or each streaming session and find the show waiting exactly where we left it, unchanged, familiar, the family intact and the couch ready and the couch gag about to play. Every viewing is a vote to continue. Every subscription is a vote to continue. Every recommendation to a friend, and every think piece, and every fan theory, and every video essay analyzing what Springfield means, including this one, is a vote to continue. We are the mechanism. The system runs on our attention. And we give our attention willingly, joyfully, because the family is there and we need the family to be there, and the loop rewards us with the family every time we ask for it. This is the final mystery. And it isn't really a mystery at all. It's just the truth about what long-running popular culture does and what we do with it. We build loops. We enter loops. We maintain loops because the loops give us something we need, and we don't always know we need it until the loop stops running and the need becomes visible in its absence. Springfield keeps going because we keep coming back. And we keep coming back because something in Springfield is home. Not a real home, not a possible home. The home that exists in the mind, when you hear certain music and see certain images, and remember sitting in a certain room watching certain things happen to people you've decided to love. That home, the one that was never real and is more real than anything. The loop runs. Springfield endures. Homer loves his family. And after 4 hours together in this strange, impossible town, with its glowing fish and its frozen children and its ancient billionaire and its dreaming safety director, after all of it, that's the thing that stays with you. Homer loves his family. Imperfectly, loudly, at great cost to his own dignity and everyone else's patience. He loves them. And that love, which no radiation can touch and no conspiracy can manage and no floating timeline can freeze or thaw, is the show's only real answer to everything it's asked. It's enough. It has always been enough. It will be enough for as long as the loop runs. And the loop will run for as long as we need it to. Which is to say, for a very long time yet. End of script. 4 hours of Simpsons mysteries no one can solve. Deeper dive. The show within the show? One of the most overlooked dimensions of Springfield's constructed reality is the role that television itself plays within the town. The Simpsons is a show about a family that watches television. The Itchy and Scratchy Show, Krusty the Clown's programming, the various local news broadcasts from Kent Brockman, the late-night channels Homer surfs at 2 in the morning when he can't sleep. Television is embedded in the fabric of Springfield life at every level, and the show has always been self-aware about this in ways that occasionally become genuinely uncomfortable. Krusty the Clown is the show's most explicit statement about the relationship between entertainment and management. Krusty is beloved by Springfield's children. He has been a constant presence in their lives for decades. He is the primary cultural figure who shapes their understanding of what comedy is, what performers look like, what television is for. And Krusty is, behind the grease paint and the rubber chicken, a deeply compromised man whose performance persona has almost entirely displaced his actual identity. The show has depicted Krusty's backstory in multiple episodes, and the backstory is consistently sad. His relationship with his father is the central wound. His father, a respected rabbi, rejected Krusty's desire to be a performer. Krusty pursued the career anyway, under an assumed persona that allowed him to perform without his family knowing. He became famous. He became rich. He became the defining cultural figure for an entire generation of Springfield children. And he has been, for decades, profoundly and specifically miserable. The show depicts this misery in specific terms: gambling addiction, emotional unavailability, a series of failed relationships, an inability to experience pleasure outside of performing, a disconnect from his own life so complete that he doesn't seem to know who he is when the costume comes off. This is what the show produces when it considers the people who manage its children's cultural experience. The man who shapes how Springfield's children understand humor and performance and entertainment is a person who cannot access his own emotions, who performs warmth for a living while feeling nothing, who is celebrated by millions while being known by no one. Krusty's misery is not incidental to his role. It is structural. A performer who was genuinely happy, genuinely connected, genuinely present in his own life would eventually communicate that to his audience. He would model something true. Springfield's children's entertainment is delivered by someone who has been performing so long that the performance has consumed the person. What they receive is a simulation of warmth and joy, produced by a man who has lost access to warmth and joy, and they cannot tell the difference because they have never been shown the difference. The Itchy and Scratchy Show is the other piece of this. The show within the show is cartoon violence, relentless and escalating, with a mouse who kills a cat in an endless loop of creative destruction. Springfield's children love it. They watch it with exactly the kind of pure, uncomplicated delight that the show's adult characters rarely manage to feel about anything. The violence is funny to them because it is stylized, because the cat always comes back, because the consequences never stick. The fan community has noted that Itchy and Scratchy is a mirror held up to The Simpsons itself, a show about characters who sustain damage and recover, who die and return, who face consequences that don't persist, whose world resets between episodes. The mouse and the cat and Springfield's family occupy the same loop, and Springfield's children watch the mouse and cat version without recognizing that they are themselves in a version of the same story. The violence is funny because it's not real. Except in Springfield, the damage is real. The radiation is real. The water is real. The children's 4 fingers are real. The town's inability to hold consequences is real. The children watching Itchy and Scratchy laugh at a show about consequence-free damage while living in a town where the consequences are real, and the damage is real, and the loop is real, and nobody is laughing. This is what Springfield uses television for. To deliver the idea that damage is consequence-free and loops are harmless and the reset is always coming. To train its population to accept the conditions of their own existence by framing those conditions as entertainment. Burns doesn't program the TV channels. He doesn't need to. The town's entertainment infrastructure has evolved independently to produce exactly the cultural product that serves the town's conditions. The loop generates the content. The content normalizes the loop. The population absorbs the content. The loop continues. Deeper dive. The outsiders and what they see. Every theory about Springfield comes down, eventually, to the question of visibility. Who can see what is happening in Springfield and who cannot? We've established that Springfield's residents, through a combination of cognitive management, economic dependency, and institutional capture, are systematically unable to see the town clearly. We've established that Frank Grimes died because he could see clearly, and the town could not accommodate his clarity. We've established that Lisa can see clearly and is protected from the consequences of that clarity only by her age and her marginalization. But there are other characters who arrive in Springfield from outside and who serve as a different kind of visibility test. The guest characters, the celebrities. The investigators who periodically show up in Springfield with some external purpose and who encounter the town's conditions without having been shaped by those conditions. What do outsiders see when they arrive in Springfield? Mulder and Scully arrive in the Springfield files to investigate Homer's alien sighting and conduct themselves with professional competence until the moment the Springfield environment begins to affect their judgment. Their investigation is methodical, their skepticism appropriate, their conclusions initially reasonable. And then Springfield absorbs them. Their skepticism softens. Their professional rigor loosens. By the end of the episode, they are dancing with the townspeople rather than investigating the anomaly, and the resolution of the case, Burns, as the alien, is presented as satisfying rather than deeply alarming. 2 federal investigators encountered a man so saturated with radiation that his body glows in the dark, and their response was to join the party. This is what Springfield does to outsiders. It brings them in, it surrounds them with its peculiar social energy, and it gradually assimilates their external perspective until they are no longer functioning as external observers, but as participants in the town's reality. The assimilation is friendly. It doesn't feel like co-optation because it doesn't involve coercion. It involves hospitality, community, the very human desire to belong to the place you find yourself in. Springfield is not hostile to outsiders. It is warmly, completely, irresistibly welcoming, and the welcome does the work that hostility couldn't do. The outsider's critical distance collapses not because it was attacked, but because Springfield is nice to them and they stopped wanting to maintain the distance. The guest stars are the most visible version of this phenomenon. Celebrity after celebrity arrives in Springfield, encounters the town's conditions, and is absorbed into the show's logic. None of them go home and report what they saw. None of them, within the show's narrative, become advocates for Springfield's people or whistleblowers about Springfield's conditions. They arrive, they participate, they leave, and Springfield continues. This is the most sophisticated element of the town's management system. Burns doesn't need to silence outsiders. Springfield silences them through warmth, through the specific pleasantness of being genuinely welcomed by a community that is practiced at making people feel like they belong. The outsider's critical perspective dissolves in the warmth, and when it dissolves, the thing that could have changed Springfield dissolves with it. The dome in the Simpsons movie was the first outside intervention that couldn't be dissolved through warmth. You cannot be pleasant at a glass dome. The EPA's containment solution bypassed the social mechanics entirely, which is why it was the first outside action that actually changed Springfield's conditions, however briefly. But even the dome got absorbed in the end, and the social mechanics reasserted, and Springfield went back to what it had always been. The town is very good at this. It has had a long time to practice. Deeper dive. Homer's resilience as the show's thesis? We've talked at length about what has been done to Homer Simpson. The crayon, the radiation, the absence of his mother, the job at the plant, the deliberate maintenance of his impairment in service of Burns's operation. The damage is real and it is extensive, and it runs from his early childhood to the present moment of whatever episode you're currently watching. But there's another dimension of Homer that the damage analysis tends to obscure, and that's the dimension of his resilience. Not the physical resilience, the cartoon indestructibility that lets him be hit by cars and survive explosions and recover from injuries that would be fatal for anyone else. The emotional and relational resilience, the specific capacity to love that has survived everything the system has done to limit his capacity for everything else. Homer has been cognitively limited since childhood. He has been neurologically impaired by a physical object in his brain. He has been environmentally poisoned by the water he's been drinking for decades. He has been managed and shaped and directed by a system that needed him broken. He has been denied his mother and given a father who was emotionally unavailable and a job that exists to exploit his limitations. And he loves his children with everything he has. He loves Marge with a consistency and a depth that the show has never allowed to fully fail. Across 36 years and dozens of near misses and hundreds of moments where the love should have been tested to the point of breaking, the system couldn't take the love. It took almost everything else. It took his IQ and his potential and his mother and his understanding of what's being done to him. It could not take his capacity to love the specific people in the specific house on the specific street where he lives. This is the show's thesis. Not a hopeful thesis in any triumphalist sense. The system wins. The system always wins in Springfield. Burns is still there, the plant is still running. The violations still aren't being reported. Homer still doesn't know what was done to him. But the love is also still there, and the show has never allowed the system to fully claim it. In 36 years of managed impairment and engineered dependency and deliberate cognitive limitation, the thing the system couldn't reach was Homer's heart, which suggests something about the limits of systems. They can manage cognition, they can manage economy, they can manage history and geography and institutional function. They can manage almost everything about a person's external conditions and many things about a person's internal states. But there are things that resist management, things that don't respond to the levers that systems use. And in Homer Simpson, the thing that resists is love. The radiation couldn't touch it. The crayon didn't reach it. Burns's century-long operation didn't engineer it away. Homer loves his family with the same intensity he would have loved them if none of the damage had happened. If Mona had stayed and the water had been clean and the crayon had never found its way into his skull. The love was in him before the system found him. And the system, for all its sophistication, has been unable to remove it. That's not a comfort, exactly. The love doesn't fix anything. Homer's love for his family doesn't clean the water or report the violations or confront Burns or give Lisa the audience she deserves or let Maggie speak. The love doesn't solve the system, but the love persists. Inside the system, against the system, untouched by the system. It persists as proof that the system is not total, that there is something in human beings that resists management, something that shows up in the places management couldn't reach and keeps being there, episode after episode, year after year. Homer falling through the door at the end of the day, calling out that he's home, the family assembling for whatever comes next. The love that makes that moment matter, that makes that specific family in that specific house, in that impossible managed contaminated town into something worth protecting and preserving and returning to. That's the show's answer to everything. Not a solution, not a resolution. Just the persistent fact of love inside an impossible situation. It's enough. After 4 hours in Springfield, after all the theories and all the evidence and all the specific, careful ways the system has broken everything it could break, the love is still there. Homer is still home. End of full script. A final thought. The show that wouldn't end. There is a specific thing that happens when a show runs long enough. It stops being a show and starts being a place. The episodes become less important than the fact of the show's continued existence, less important than the knowledge that it is there, running, producing new content, available to return to. The Simpsons crossed that threshold a long time ago. Most people who watch it now do not watch every episode with the attention they would bring to a first-time viewing of something new. They visit, they dip in, they find an episode running on television while they're eating dinner, and they sit with it for a few minutes and then go back to whatever they were doing. And that's fine. That's what a place does. You don't experience a place with the same attention you give to a new experience. You exist in it. You move through it. It is familiar in a way that allows you to relax into it rather than engage with it. Springfield has become a place in this sense. Most American viewers can close their eyes and describe it with more accuracy than they can describe most real towns. The nuclear plant on the edge of town, the elementary school with its struggling budget, the bar with the dim light and the same regulars, the retirement home, the church, the police station from which Chief Wiggum operates with magnificent, consistent incompetence, the house on Evergreen Terrace with the slightly broken fence and the 2 cars, and the kitchen where Marge stands and the couch where the family lands. These places are more real to more people than many actual places. Springfield exists in the cultural imagination with a specificity and a completeness that most real towns cannot claim for themselves. Thousands of hours of content have given it this quality. The accumulated detail of 36 years of storytelling has made it dense and specific and three-dimensional in a way that fictional places rarely achieve. And everything we've discussed tonight, every theory and mystery and buried storyline and piece of canonical evidence, every thread we've pulled and every pattern we've identified, is an expression of how real this place has become. You don't build elaborate theories about places that don't feel real. You build them about places you inhabit. Places whose internal logic matters to you, places you've spent enough time in that their inconsistencies and mysteries feel personal. The fan community has spent decades building theories about Springfield because Springfield is real to them. The radiation theory and the coma theory and the geography mystery and the floating timeline are not just interesting intellectual puzzles, they are ways of taking the place seriously, ways of honoring the investment of attention and love that the audience has brought to the show over decades. Springfield deserves to be taken seriously. It has always deserved this. The show built it with enough care and enough internal consistency and enough genuine honesty about the human condition that it became a place worth interrogating, worth defending, worth returning to. The mysteries don't diminish it. They are the fullest expression of how much it matters. 4 hours in Springfield. We're glad you came. The mysteries are what the love leaves behind when it has time to become literature. The fan community doesn't theorize about shows they've stopped caring about. The theories about Springfield, elaborate and specific and passionately maintained across years and decades, are the trace of something that was genuinely felt. The feeling came first. The family on the couch, the jokes that landed, the rare serious moments that hit harder than they had any right to. The feeling accumulated over time, season by season, episode by episode, until it had built enough weight that the intellect needed to do something with it. The theories are what the intellect does with the accumulated weight of caring about something for a very long time. Every theory in this video is, at its foundation, an act of love. The radiation theory is what love does when it looks clearly at a place it cares about and refuses to pretend the problems aren't there. The coma theory is what love does when it asks what a man's deepest wish would be and finds the answer so simple it breaks your heart. The grand unified theory of Springfield is what love does when it steps back far enough to see the whole shape of something and finds that the shape, in all its brokenness, is beautiful. The Simpsons is beautiful. Broken and managed and impossible, and permanently 36 years old, and radiating something that isn't quite light, but does something similar in the minds of everyone who's ever sat with it in the dark. That's the show. That's the mystery. That's the 4 hours. Thank you for being here.